Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Good stand. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We'll go to the roll call.
Lorraine Foss,
Here.
Charles Venuto,
Here.
John Byron,
Yo.
Vinnie Taranto,
Here.
John Windsor,
Here.
Gary Casto, David Lane,
Here.
Karen McLaughlin, Stephanie Ely, here, John Durkee,
Here.
Courtney Barker, here, Todd Swingle, Gina Cusa, here, Danielle Bowden, here.
Okay. And to the agenda, did we have any changes to the agenda? Can I hear a motion to approve?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
John Byron, motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Stephanie Ely with a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And Terry has joined us. Okay, monthly progress report.
Hey, good morning. The month has been mostly consumed by updating the project plan, as I'm sure you can well imagine. One thing that's not listed here is that we've also put a lot of energy into response planning in case there is a large fish kill. We've been coordinating with multiple agencies, coming up with protocols, working on contractual relationships. Keep Brevard Beautiful is willing to sort of be in charge of take on logistics, and so we're working on plans for how to do that. We've had permitting conversations with FWC about getting a special activity license to be able to harvest the dead fish and remove them from the lagoon instead of letting them sink and rot and return nutrients to the system and add to bacterial decay and more DO problems that might cause more fish kills. And in fact, we could use commercial fishermen and their gear for those activities. So we're contacting commercial fishermen to find out who would be interested, coming up with decision trees, getting their names on a list to go on a special activity license if we need to implement something like that. I have additional information on the bloom conditions, which I'm not planning to present to you because you have a full agenda, but if we get done early or you want any of that outside of the meeting, I'm happy to share that information. The bloom, the brown tide is, of course, still going on and quite strong in the Banana River, but it is considerably less concentrated than it was a month ago. So the cool air and the sunny skies and the breezy weather are helping us for the moment, and hopefully this bloom will burn itself out before we have too many cloudy days. Yes, yes. The Turkey Creek post-Irma re-dredging, the dredging work has been completed. The dewatering and the dredge material management area will go on for quite some time, but the dredging is completed. And the last little bit, they demonstrated a vacuum head that is designed to just remove shallow layers of muck and leave the heavier sediment behind. And we are collecting field data to measure how well that did or didn't work. So we'll have a report for you on that next month. We continue to work on the contracts with cities for the projects that they've proposed that you all in the County Commission have approved. So there are a bunch of those in process. We did send your memo, Lorraine Koss signed the memo to the cities asking for information on their sewage discharges during Hurricane Irma, following Hurricane Irma. We have one response back so far, so we can reach out to them and try to get a better response for you.
I did reach out, and we got 7 as of this morning.
Oh,
Altogether, so.
fantastic. Okay.
Okay, so how many are we waiting on then?
7 of 8 have responded as of this morning. So I sent them a reminder earlier this week, and I just checked it this morning, and they had told me they were working on it this week, and so we had a bunch just put it in.
Okay. Can you talk about your species spotlight and the dredging and the videos? And the logo contest?
So we've started a Saturday species spotlight on our Facebook page. So we are highlighting a different species each Saturday. And started off with our diamondback terrapins because we have a citizen scientist app with the FWC that you can report these, and with the conservation of the Brevard Zoo, they're recording sightings of these, so we were trying to link it to some citizen scientist things that they could do, and gives you a little information, a quick tidbit about the species, and then what you can do to help locate them. Same thing with our horseshoe crab, which is our second one that we had done, and gave the link to the app where you can report horseshoe crabs, as well as you can do it on the FWC website. And they're getting ready to have their mating season, or the heavy part of their mating season coming up.
Underway.
Yeah. And then we had, last Saturday was one of our fish in the lagoon, so our pipefish, and we're going to be focusing on one of our birds this next time, so tune in on Saturday to see which one that is. And then we have our lagoon logo contest. So we started this about a month ago, and it is coming up this next Friday. On the 23rd is the deadline, but people can enter both on the Facebook page and on our website to put in a logo for the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program. And we will hopefully be getting lots of artists. It's been shared quite a bit, both among the artist community, with the municipalities, and a lot of our partners as well. So we're waiting to see what kind of great logos we get in on that.
And Brandon's worked with Dylan on filming the next sort of featured video, this one on the Turkey Creek dredging. Dylan just hasn't had time to finish the processing on that, but the MIMS muck dredging project, that liner installation is nearly complete, so we hope to have a dredge on site in the next week or two. For the groundwater monitoring study funded by the legislature, the $1 million groundwater, part of that, component of that is doing a survey of septic owners in Brevard County, and the survey questions were drafted by the social research experts at University of Central Florida, and we've reviewed that, and we're on about the second or third iteration of that document, so we're looking forward to getting that survey underway to learn what people know about their septic systems, what they think about their septic systems, what they're willing to do in terms of maintenance of septic systems, so that we know, what it is we're grappling with that we need to work on moving forward. Brandon's also been working on your request to clip presentations out of the prior Oversight Committee meetings and get those posted. I don't know how far along.
Yeah. I just got another one up the other day, and I was processing one last night that will be posted today.
And then a day in the life, you want to talk about that?
So we were contacted by Missy Weiss, who is with a local nonprofit. She is doing a program called A Day in the Life, and she was involved with this program up in New York. And what it was a way to take a snapshot of the health of water bodies in that area. They would send schools, citizens, different groups in on one day in the year. They would take various parameters such as water quality, look at species, do shoreline monitoring, all these different things, and report this snapshot of that water body for one day. So she's now down here in Florida. She wants to start that program down here, and she's working with the schools and many other agencies in the area. And she reached out to us, so we're working with her to help coordinate that, and we'll be involved with that program. So it is on October 4th will be the snapshot day. And the idea is that each school will be paired up with an expert of some sort, so whether that's an expert who can go out and identify fish that are pulled up in a seine net, or one that can help identify plants along the shoreline while they're doing a shoreline survey. They will do some component with those schools, but all the schools will be collecting this data, or many of the schools will be collecting this data. And it goes on a centralized website that anyone can access. The schools can then pull up that data and manipulate it in different ways to, practice their science skills. And it'll give us sort of this look each year on what's going on in the lagoon, and it'll be around the same time every year so that we get a snapshot of how we're progressing.
So we're planning to invite Missy in later this fall when she has more concrete plans about participation and what everyone will be doing, and I think will help fulfill the interest of the committee in getting involved in the schools and getting schools involved in the lagoon.
Yeah, she just had one planning meeting so far. She just contacted me the other day about her next upcoming planning meetings now that she has schools on board, and this will go more into some of the logistics that they're going to have to do. And so I'm going to be speaking at both of those planning meetings.
Brandon, on the clipping, which I think would be really helpful, and I appreciate what you've sent out. I think it was October maybe that we had the speakers on seagrass loss. There were 5 speakers, which was really an enlightening presentation. I don't know where your priorities are, but that's one I think would be really good to get up through our website and through social media. I think there's a lot of people that would find it educational as we did.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been working from the first meetings and going forward, but if there's priorities that you want to see, I can work on seagrass and definitely get that one up there.
Thank you.
As we've discussed here often, the interface with the education with Brevard Public Schools is a very important component of the future for the lagoon. When you think you've got a critical mass of stuff posted and ready and so on, I would hope that you will try and engage the proper nodes in that bureaucracy to make them aware of it and to encourage their use in both science and in STEM-related programs. Secondly, I serve on the planning board in the city of Cocoa Beach. Under state law, every local planning agency is required to have a representative of the school system. That's so the communities don't forget schools when they're doing stuff that involves long-range planning. I wonder, we don't need a state law to do it, I wonder if it might not be a good idea if the school board were to appoint a coordinator to serve with this body on an advisory non-member basis as we do with planning boards. It's a liaison. We talk an awful lot about school board stuff and school stuff and K through 12 and so on. It'd be nice to have somebody inside the tent who listens to that. And I don't want to make an motion now, but it's something I think on the bureaucracy side that it might be worth exploring, since you're just across the street from those cats.
Stephanie?
In that light, there is a government relations coordinator for Brevard Public Schools. But I also was wondering if Missy's going to reach out to the private and parochial schools as well.
Very good.
I'm not sure which schools she's been in touch with, but I don't know if she's just focusing on public or if she's going to private. I think it's relatively open as far as what I saw the program was in New York. They didn't limit it to just public schools, so I would assume she would follow that same path down here.
Okay. And if you would mention that to her, that
Yeah.
would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
It's been a busy month of meetings, and with the lagoons, yes.
Microsaur and Kilroy.
Yes. MICO, so we're at 90% complete on the plans for MICO sewer line, and we also submitted a grant request to EPA, or the EPA 319 program. It's through the state for additional funding for that project. At Kilroy's, we are investing. What we're trying to figure out is the relative importance of canal dredging versus the open water dredging in the lagoon. So muck that's in the open waters of the lagoon is fluxing nutrients, which is bad, and it's smothering seagrass, or areas that could otherwise potentially be seagrass. Whereas in the canals, there's not as much of a potential for seagrass, but they're fluxing nutrients into the water column. What we found with the limited amount of sampling that has been going on in the canals is that the organic content of the muck in the canals is often much higher than out in the open lagoon, and so that flux is greater. So the question is that greater flux then getting out of those canal systems into the open lagoon and having more of a negative impact than we previously realized? How do we document that? So we're looking at trying to use Kilroy stations that are these continuous monitoring stations that would measure both flow and concentration of nutrients going out of the canals into the lagoon. And so that would be part of the respond expense to try to gauge the importance of canals to overall lagoon, restoring lagoon health. So lots of meetings this month with many staff participating in different meetings, and most of us attended Palm Bay's Art Sustainability event and got a good practice run for. You have a handout. You should have a handout. Oh, are they on the table? Yeah. So our office, through Matt Culver, has previously coordinated an annual event called Waterfest. It's been coordinated with U.S. Coast Guard, Fish and Wildlife, a bunch of different agencies. It's during National Safe Boating Week, but it's been lagoon focused. We partnered with Anglers for Conservation and held one of their Hook Kids on Fishing events. So this year we want to have a very lagoon focus to this event. And so we're looking at all the kinds of activities that we could add to Waterfest that would bring attention and better understanding to the lagoon. And so we practiced some of that in Palm Bay at Art Sustainability. So if you have ideas, one of the things that we're hoping to do is, Brandon's calling it a swirl village, but to look at the technologies that we're funding through the lagoon plan that are proposed that either reduce the amount of pollution coming from people's yards and lives or the cleanup in the lagoon, bring some of those vendors in and have them display what these technologies are so that we can show people, what is an advanced treatment system septic tank, and what is a denitrification drain field, and what does the cutter head on a muck dredge look like. And so bring in some touchy-feely stuff so people can better appreciate what it's going to take to restore the lagoon. All right, and I think that was all that I wanted to highlight. Unless you have the questions.
Yes.
You highlight presentations by staff members. I know a lot of people on the committee are giving presentations, and I'm not sure whether it's worthwhile to capture that in some way to let the public know that the committee's out in the community trying to do things too.
I think that would be really important. We are, I don't want to say frequently, but we do get criticism that we are not getting the information out enough. And I think it's hard for people to understand that with, over 500,000 people, and it's hard to get more than 20 of them at a time, and there's new information to convey, all the time, that it's all of us presenting all the time, and it still doesn't feel like enough. So certainly anything that we can do to document, I think that would be really
I
great.
just want to footstop John's point. I mean, MRC's got half a dozen or more, quote, certified Lagoon lifesaver presenters with approved material and sort of, as much as possible up-to-date information. So, maybe what we want is just a registry of folks that are geared up and ready to go. I know John has done it. I've done it. I think there are probably some other folks here that have done it. And when you get a call from an HOA or whatever, instead of taking down a staff member's time, one of the volunteers can jump in.
So maybe a sort of community calendar kind of thing that we could all keep all that stuff entered, and then anybody who's interested could see it, and we would have a record.
Yeah, I was thinking more of if you get the call. I mean, so at MRC, people call in and they say, hey, we have this group. Can somebody come and present? So we it's more reaching out to the group then. So I mean, I'm happy to post anything that shows up on my calendar. But what I'm suggesting is that if you're getting requests and you need help staffing them, filling them, then use this call list.
Yes.
We could bid on the opportunity to give a present. I would do Tortoise Island.
They could bid on them.
Lansing.
Danielle?
You could do Halpaw.
I think every time somebody does teach a class, if we take a picture of the class, that could be posted on our Facebook page just to convey.
Here's another class taught.
And if you have a meeting that is coming up that's open to the public, please let me know, and I can put it out there and advertise it on our Facebook page.
Okay. John?
Ignorant question, does the county have a routine email scatter system, as cities do?
We're not as good as that as cities are, because it's just such a huge county.
Well, people sign in and say, here's my email, any news you got, just scatter it to us. Well, that's unfortunate. This would be a marvelous way to put things up.
You can always send it out to us.
Yeah, we could also, if we did have a significant schedule, we could send out a press release as well. Here are the opportunities to learn more about the Lagoon this month. Not that we have that many requests in 1 month, I don't know.
Hey, welcome back.
Well, that brings up a good point. We could send out a notice to the businesses and things like that, that we have email lists for, to let them know that the MRC in natural resources, if they want to have somebody come in and speak about the lagoon, that they have that opportunity. Because I don't know if there's a lot of people that understand that.
I wonder if maybe this might not be something to look at getting our arms around, getting ourselves a really good email mailing list as an element of the education communication line item in the next year, and actually throw a couple bucks at figuring out how to do this, how to populate it, etc. The cities have lists that you can get simply by asking as a citizen. The various environmental and conservation groups, nonprofits have their lists. At the end of the day, it's just a big sack full of email addresses, and I think we have the funding mechanism that you could throw a few bucks at somebody just to figure it out. I don't think it takes staff bandwidth to do that. And that might be a useful thing to do to tee up this year.
And David?
I was just going to say our website and our Facebook page both have links to say contact us, where people can manually enter their email addresses, just like any website out there that's trying to grow their audience.
And that might also, you know, if we did have to respond to an emergency situation, that could be useful as well, since we know that's a highly interested audience.
Terry for MRC and for others, for example, Restore Our Shores got oyster bagging programs up. It's on Facebook page, but it can't be shared. There's no share buttons. So those of us that like to spread information to various communities are unable to do so. So whoever's putting these things out, let's make information shareable to the public, that's all.
I'm a Facebook dummy. I don't even know, how do you post something and make it not shareable?
See, Vinny.
You'll have to ask my 11-year-old grandson. I have no idea either.
Danielle.
Do we have a consistent hashtag for all of our education pieces?
I've been using hashtag Save Our Lagoon.
Okay.
I don't have a
Okay.
Hashtag teach Terry.
Go and help. I don't need to learn anymore. I've hit my learning limit, so now I just need help.
Terry, let's you and I form a help group.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and
IT advice, right.
Vinny will lead that, I'm sure.
Sounds like fun.
Okay, well, I think we're ready for our special presentation. I think we've all been waiting for this. So Duane De Freese is here. We'll talk about the National Estuary Program. And I guess Walker will. Pardon me?
Fiscal report?
Monthly fiscal.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I can say a couple words while Dwayne's PowerPoint pulls up. So the only thing to really note there is on the back page, in actuals, you see we have reimbursed Indian Harbor Beach for their Gleason Park project and Palm Bay Bayfront for their Bayfront Stormwater Pond. The Rockledge, Reswept, that's also in process. I believe there's another one or two that are in process. So you'll be beginning to see those completed projects. The reimbursement requests are coming in and the dollars are being spent. Cape Canaveral, Central Boulevard. Okay, Cape Canaveral, but they should be.
Yes, I'm just letting you know.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a preferably monthly or at least quarterly obligation plan that says by the end of this month I want to have this many dollars obligated, and then if you don't have such a critter, I suggest you should. And secondly, if you do have such a critter, I think it would be useful for us to see the deltas between actual and plan. If we aren't flowing the money out as fast as the plan says, that goes into red.
So we asked the cities to provide us a quarterly, an estimate of what they expect to spend quarterly. But because of the scale of some of these reimbursements, rather than putting together reimbursement packages quarterly, they have tended to wait till the project was done and just do one reimbursement request at the end. So it's hard to...
Could you give some thought to giving us visibility into what is the expenditure plan out of the trust fund, actual checks written, as opposed to, and then compare that to what's actually happening? Because it's great to have the money, but it doesn't do anything until we start to spend it, and I think part of our oversight duties should be to have some visibility into the rate of spending, and are we falling behind on obligating?
Okay.
Thank you.
So if I'm reading this correctly, we paid $34,000 on Gleason Park, $30,000 on Bayfront. I see a $535,000 expense up on the top line. Was that paid? This is under,
That is the sum of the rows above it. And so you have to flip
it's under the
page.
actual, but it's on the actual column.
Yes, in the actual
total.
column, that 535 is in italics. It is the sum of the rows above it that include all of the,
Turkey Creek and Miko.
the table at the
I got
bottom
it.
of the first page.
I got it.
Right, so it's mostly, Turkey Creek and Miko.
So it's flipped over from the page on the front. Got it. Thank you.
Continuation of the table that starts on the front.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Before we begin, I want to let you know I just came back last night from Washington, D.C. With some good NEP news, and that is that as of yesterday morning, we were approaching 70 House members signing a letter of support for continued federal funding on the House side, have strong support on the Senate side. As you probably read in the newspaper, we are still zeroed out in the president's budget, but it looks like we will have continued funding for 2019 in House and Senate budgets as they move to the omnibus bill. But the other really unique thing is, what was it, 2 meetings ago, you instructed staff to take a look at the NEPs, and we got lucky because the last week I've been with almost all of the NEP directors and had the conversation that I was going to come back early, meet with you today, and so actually can bring some conversational news into this discussion. So the PowerPoint you probably looked at, you went, oh my gosh, how are we going to get through this? I wrote this PowerPoint to begin to give you some detail that isn't close to the detail that's out there. But I want to tell you a story today about these NEPs because you're going to see some similarities and some differences. I picked them because of those similarities and differences, but we are in the beginning of a conversation. And so you should look at myself and my staff as your staff. And this conversation, if it needs to move forward, we are available to you. I've got access to all of these 28 comprehensive conservation management plans. We are revising our own, which in the second presentation, I'll tell you where we're at there. So if at the end of this day that you've got deep questions about any of these, just contact me directly. I will get those questions to staff so staff can post them at some point, so we stay within the boundaries of sunshine. So with that, this is the map of the NEPs. And so you had picked a couple, but I wanted to ask you to do something in your homework and just get on Google and Google around at a certain scale any of these 28 NEPs in Chesapeake Bay and take a look at the physical location, the latitude and longitude, and the size. And once you do that, you'll recognize how different the Indian River Lagoon is to almost all of these. And that physical difference, that, we are narrow, shallow, lagoonal, spanning this, tropical, subtropical, temperate, transition, kind of sets us aside. So my message before I even start is there's similarities, there are differences, but we are kind of in a unique situation where we need to make decisions based on what we have here. There are a lot of good best management practices, and I'll show you a few of these. And I want to thank Walker. We went through this hard. We spent a lot of time, and appreciate all your support, and Virginia as well, because we wanted to get this to a level where you could use it. I show you this just to show you the power of the National Estuary Programs. This was generated about 1.5 years ago in the Office of Research and Development that advises EPA. And what you see here, and you don't need to read all these, is that we can look at our comprehensive conservation management plan and actually leverage an analysis against the 27 others to see where we stand against the nation. And you'll see some very unique differences, and it is something that's important for you to consider. You are doing basically a 4-phase implementation project plan. NEPs have a much bigger management umbrella that's really mandated by Section 320 of the Clean Water Act. And so you get the, from this analysis. So everything in red is topics that were not in our 2008 CCMP that are advising me and my team now as we look at this update for 2030. But on the big topics, you see, how do you maximize ecological integrity? How do you maximize social benefits? And in some of these negative categories, how do you minimize some of those stressors and impacts? Also within our purview is looking at economic opportunities. How do you maximize and optimize the successive communities along our lagoons and our estuaries? And how do we maximize and optimize stewardship? Some of these won't fall within your purview in the Save Our Lagoon initiative, but it does fall within ours. And so that link between your county program and our national program is very important. And alignment with our new CCMP will be important because we go beyond just the things that you are looking at. During our conversation, or your conversation with staff, you mentioned two estuaries you were very particularly interested in. That was Chesapeake Bay and Puget Sound. And of course, Chesapeake Bay is a unique circumstance because they are not within the National Estuary Program, but they are a congressionally dedicated national estuary. Just for your information, we have a new one in Florida. Perdido Bay has now been included as an estuary within a national program funded actually by some of the BP oil spill money to get going, and so that's moving forward as we speak. But I picked a number of others: Casco Bay, Long Island Sound, Narragansett Bay, Sarasota Bay, Tampa Bay, because I think they have relevance to your discussions, and I think they have some good insights into some nuances that may be worth considering as we move forward. And then the second presentation will be, where does this fit with our current reorganization of Indian River Lagoon? I'm not going to spend much time on this other than to say there's lots of stressors, and you are focused on nutrient stressors, which is exactly where you should be in our system. And you're going to see in these 7 examples, it's exactly where all 7 of these other estuaries focused. There are certain aspects that are difficult to manage. We know we have climate change impacts. We know we have warming temperatures. We know we have growing populations that are hard to get in front of. But for almost every single estuary within this network, nutrient stress is something we can and should control because so much of it is related to the plumbing, whether it's stormwater, wastewater treatment, internal loads, atmospheric deposition. It's something we can get a hold of, but it's not the only stressor. And what complicates the long-term stewardship is how these stressors start interacting with each other, making us more vulnerable to nutrient loads and other pollutant loads. And so we need to work where we can, as fast as we can, and literally invest where we can get the biggest bang for the buck. And I think you are all having that conversation in very deep ways at every one of your meetings. So let's first take a look at Chesapeake Bay. And this is an example of, don't worry about the slide, listen to the story. But I wanted these slides so if somebody looks at this later can get a sense. So the story of Chesapeake Bay is actually complicated. Complicated socially, ecologically, and economically. And if you look at this history of now almost 3+ decades, this is a classic example of this is not one and done. And you'll see this with all these estuaries, that we've gone from agreement to disagreement in Chesapeake Bay, from lawsuits, to proactive partnerships. There have been starts and there have been stops. But what has made Chesapeake Bay, I think, one of the models of success is that they've stuck with it. Even in the tough times, even in the times of disagreement, they have held that coalition or lack of a coalition together because everybody was focused on one intended goal: clean water and a healthy bay. And so if we look at that kind of history and we start thinking about where they focused, and you will see a common thread in this. The first focuses were in wastewater remediation. Upgrading wastewater treatment plants, upgrading, septic systems to sewer, especially close to water bodies. Looking at this really large watershed where agricultural pursuits were very complicated but extensive. So the stormwater component of this was a big component of the nutrient load. And if you look at 1985 to 2015, 900 million pounds of nutrient pollution, both nitrogen and phosphorus, have been reduced. So they've seen 57% reduction, in nitrogen, phosphorus by 75%. And while this is by no means a quantifiable statistical metric, in my looking at this, I kept seeing the same number as, 50% reduction. Seems to be a number that keeps appearing in a lot of these, 50 to 60%. A significant reduction in nutrient loads at least has started the process of recovery. And for the first time in 2015, that nutrient sector, wastewater, stormwater, is now, getting their TMDLs, to where they need to be. But stormwater is the fastest load, and this is the challenge of these long-term plans. You see pie charts, and the pie charts show you percentage. You reduce that wastewater percentage, and 10 years later, and you'll see this in Tampa Bay, wastewater percentage goes down. Doesn't mean it's not still important. Now, all of a sudden, stormwater has the larger percentage. So this isn't just about relative contributions, it's also about load contributions. And so if you look at Chesapeake Bay, and this is a story you will see, these dispersed kinds of delivery systems of nutrients become harder to get to, a longer time challenge. In the Indian River Lagoon, we're going to see those challenges with urban stormwater, but they are no less important in the long-term strategy because those small individual loads start adding up to big loads overall. And you can see the numbers here that stormwater still is a driver of decision-making as we move forward. And agriculture solutions, while we often hear about this tension between kind of urban development and agriculture, the fact is Chesapeake Bay has had some remarkable success in best management practices. And these are not just regulatory mandates, but they are agriculture doing their job better to be more productive, less costly, and less impactful to their own water bodies. And if you look at a couple of these, conservation tillage, cover crops, streamside fencing, some of these simple agreements can have tremendous benefits overall when you get a whole industry sector looking at best management. And we have a lot of work to do in that BMP world, not just along the Indian River Lagoon, but throughout every watershed in the state of Florida. And agriculture needs to be part of the player. And if you look at that third bullet, you look at the contribution, you have to look at what's going on in the landscape. And we're going to talk about this a little bit maybe later, but when you start looking at, where does reclaimed water go? Where does biosolids go? In the Chesapeake Bay, it turned out a lot of the loads were livestock manure and poultry litter. And so some of it is the process of, agricultural management. And you need to look where those loads are and how those loads contribute to both surface and groundwater. You have done a remarkable job, and we're not there yet with the Indian River Lagoon NEP, to kind of have benchmarks. I love the way the website is looking. The public needs to understand root causes, and they need to see it in a graphic way. And Chesapeake Bay took a business toolkit approach. They looked at their pie charts. They used the best available science to identify the loads, and then they attacked the loads. And so while that attack, that sense of urgency, when you look at Chesapeake Bay over 30 years, the fact is this takes some time to implement. And I know you all have that sense of urgency, and I keep kind of going, yeah, but you're only like a year old. And so this is not, you are in the beginning of the beginning. And so take a deep breath. You know, you're just in the beginning of a 10-year plan, and you are structured to be adaptive and responsive to new science. So what does success look like? And I think this is and this paper just came out, another fortuitous paper. But sustained management actions targeted at nitrogen concentrations, but also phosphorus, have reduced, these concentrations, which are different than loads, by 23% since 1984. And so we are beginning to see seagrasses coming back into systems that haven't seen seagrasses for decades. And so the message is that this may take a while, but if you stay at it, you will see water quality improvements. Puget Sound is another interesting player, and I know you're really interested in Puget Sound, and I talked to the Puget Sound folks just 2 days ago, and I said, so what really was the trigger for you all? And Puget Sound is really deep, and I, be honest, didn't recognize the difficulties that they have that are different than ours, but also similar. And I just jotted down in my conversation, the 12 counties, 20 really large urbanized cities, 17 tribes, 4.8 million people. And the problems are not throughout the entire system, but the driver for their concerns very much is this nation's center for shellfish. And so Puget Sound is having some water quality problems that are very similar to what we have, but they're in certain embayments. And so, again, the message there is much like ours. So today, if you ask me, is the Indian River Lagoon looking good or bad, I have to say, where do you mean? Mosquito Lagoon looks pretty good right now in some respects for water clarity. Banana River looks horrible. And so what's going on in Puget Sound is a whole suite of capacity building issues, and I've just highlighted a few. But the director basically said what's driving them is this coalition that they have created that's looking at both the Puget Sound Partnership and a focus on nutrient reduction. And if you look at these highlighted actions, and there are a lot of them, it's about infrastructure. It's about wastewater treatment. It's about septic systems. It's about looking at no net loss of habitat function. It's making sure that science and monitoring is not just engaged with those management decisions, but they are aligned so you're getting the right science at the right time, at the right level to make good decisions. And aligning these goals and best management practices to maintain what is the nation's, one of the best areas for shellfish farming in the nation. And so a lot of their worries have been around pathogens, both human and livestock waste pathogens. And so a story that I wasn't aware of, but I'm going to share with you today from them. I said, what's your best success story? And it was this small embayment in Puget Sound, which, remember, is a deep water system. It's called Drayton Harbor Recovery. The loads there were primarily a combination of wastewater treatment, but some really heavy urban and agricultural stormwater issues. Fecal contamination shut down that shell fishery in 1997, and that's a big deal there. I mean, that is an industry driver, and it was one of the premier shellfish production bays. And so they spent 20 years in an aggressive nutrient reduction strategy looking at those two loads, and it has paid off. And so they are now, harvesting again in that system, but it took 2 decades, from 1997 until last year, to get those waters to where they could safely harvest shellfish again. And what I really like about Puget Sound and what I really want to do with the NEP is to move into this graphic world where complicated stories get told in a simple way so the public gets it. And they are particularly good with this vital signs. A little tough to read on the detail here. But they have looked at their system and the drivers and the vital signs of health so that anybody from the public can look and see in one shot, what is it you're actually integrating here in your consideration? And the problem with this is you don't do it all at once. You go to the focal points, so you're going to move the bar forward. And you'll see this in all of these. It's nutrients, nutrients, nutrients in most cases. Casco Bay is an interesting parallel to us. You know, if you look at Casco Bay up in Maine, it's got this broad ocean access, and all of a sudden they start blooming in ways that they never saw before. So they've been suffering from blooms for a while. They just had their last one in December, and like us, they were shocked because in their winter season, normally they don't see blooms. They've seen this transition, you know, from the typical kid who wants to be a commercial fisherman who would start clamming, build their cash base, then get a little bay boat with cash, no loan, and eventually move to the offshore. Well, that whole inshore fishery is gone for them. And what they're seeing is this complex interaction where these changes, these blooms, very different than ours, looks like, at least with the current science, that they may be starting offshore and actually coming into the system, hitting that nutrient base, and then exploding. But it is complicated, and they are still unclear about, how do they address those management issues other than this simple one. If we reduce those nutrient loads in the bays, and especially up those tributaries where you have dispersed water, then at least you're not going to have that base nutrient load to fuel those blooms, even though they feel very comfortably right now, even before the hard science is all in, that they are seeing the beginning of climate change impacts. And then they are seeing the impacts of acidification up there with some of their shellfish. And so their collaboration from clean water, again, the same storyline, focus on nutrients, look at combined sewer overflows, look at reducing stormwater pollution, look at the urban waterway. For them, they wanted to make sure that they had safe swimming and actually got a designated no discharge out area because they have a lot of vessel interactions. Monitoring is a challenge for all estuaries, both funding and integrating. And deciding what to monitor at what levels at what times is probably the biggest challenge we all share across the nation, because there is very little long-term stable funding for integrated comprehensive monitoring networks, and we struggle with that here. And for them, again, their shellfish is kind of the beginning of their economy. So that's their success, is to make sure that those shell fisheries stay strong. I pick Long Island Sound mainly because I grew up there and I remember what Great South Bay looked like when the duck farmers were all in. Long Island Sound, the other reason I picked it is they suffered from pretty serious brown tide blooms, different species than ours, but the same kinds of drivers. And unlike us, this is a massive urban, ecology. And so if you look at the past 20 years, they've reduced their loads by 40 million pounds. They have recovered as much habitat. Think about this urban core. I mean, habitat is really, deer, on these systems. They've lost a lot of their estuarine connections. But their challenges are not just that urban waterway. And so even though they've done this massive amount of nitrogen reduction, starting even before 2001, but having total maximum daily loads gave them targets. And those targets set bars. And those targets may move over time, but it gives us all a quantitative goal to go for. And in fact, the target was 58.5% nitrogen reduction. They've already pulled 42 million pounds of nitrogen out of the sound, and they are seeing recovery. And the big issue in the bay was mainly hypoxia, low oxygen, and it gets worse as you move westward closer to the urban core of New York City. And so they're in their CCMP revision like we are, and they're saying, where do we move next? What's the big challenge? And for them, it's that dispersed stormwater as you move up these tributaries. And the other thing that they're looking at, if you've ever looked at the history of oysters on the east coast of North America, oyster fishing in the 1800s, 1900s, it was the protein for everybody. And so they are really driving massive oyster restoration projects, as is Chesapeake Bay, and as we are as well. Narragansett Bay is near and dear to my heart because I did my graduate degree up there. They have just released a State of the Bay report, which I urge you all to take a look at. It's the kind of science at a level that I aspire for us but we will be challenged to get there because we do not have, the decades of concentrated data and monitoring, all focused at University of Rhode Island, and so it was all centralized and not dispersed among agencies. They too, it started with wastewater infrastructure, and then it was stormwater infrastructure, and looking at some of the historic toxic loads. So there's a lot of hazmat issues up there because of industry. By the way, that is a similar story in New York, where some of those early industries have legacy loads, even radiation in New York City, that go back decades and a half a century that they will be remediating for decades longer. But I wanted to show you this map because it's instructive. So if you start to overlay, the approach in Narragansett Bay, and you look at their nutrient budgets in the early 2000s and then 2013 to 2015, they've done a 55% decrease in total nitrogen in wastewater, and they've made a 45% decrease in total phosphorus. And they've done it in a combination of ways that started with wastewater infrastructure, but it was integrated with stormwater. But there they had a lot of small wastewater treatment plants, privately owned, small municipalities, and they actually went through consolidation, looking at where they could consolidate and gain efficiencies in infrastructure by bringing more small municipalities into a larger regional plant. And you can see in this graphic, not great in the color rendition, how much work has been done. So these gray areas, right in the watershed, all in through here, this is where they've attacked septic to sewer conversions. So they looked at septic to sewer as an integrated plan with wastewater treatment, increasing the capacity for wastewater, and then increasing the loads by moving septic to sewer. The two in Florida are really interesting and also great examples of success stories. Sarasota Bay, began back in '89, focused on wastewater treatment plant upgrades, and also, and you'll see this in Tampa Bay as well, a focus on AWT, moving from primary and secondary treatment to advanced wastewater treatment, but also looking at reclaimed water for alternative supplies, septic tank replacements, stormwater facilities, and priority watersheds. Their goal was to reduce nitrogen by 48%, and that was in their 95 CCMP, and they are at 64% reductions. And so they are seeing not just an improving water quality, but improving fisheries, improving seagrasses, and so they are, not comfortable. And this is the other message. This is a long game. When you start looking good isn't when you start letting down your guard, because we're all growing in population, but they have seen dramatic improvements with infrastructure improvements. And Tampa Bay is the model I kind of like the best, because I remember Tampa Bay in 1978 when I got here. I remember going over that bridge, and I was coming from Rhode Island thinking, I saw Florida in that, beautiful, clear, gin-clear tropical water. And the bay was actually that slime green, guacamole green in a full bloom in '78. And I went, wow, I've never seen this color in a water body before. Tampa Bay, again, multi-tiered approach, starting with wastewater infrastructure, large stormwater features, septic to sewer conversion. And what I like about Tampa Bay, and I was just at Holly Greening, I know Holly's been before you, is just retired after I think it was almost 20 years as the director. And what's remarkable about Tampa Bay is when they put their nitrogen and nutrient reduction consortium together, that consortium is held not through just the bad times. They are just as consolidated today when it looks good as they were then. So holding this momentum together when things start looking good is a bigger challenge than holding it together when things are looking really bad. And so if you look at these reductions, and this is the example of the pie, on the left-hand side, you see this point source load, on percentage in the 70s, and this dramatic shift to, stormwater. And I've talked to Holly at length about this, and she said it's not about this linear thinking. Even though they focused on wastewater treatment, they were doing the other things also, because if citizens aren't engaged on their lawns dealing with fertilizer, those citizens don't see the link between the individual footprint and the municipal footprint and the large regional footprint. And so there's a kind of a psychology, a community engagement component of this. Even though my personal footprint may be small, if I am actively engaged in my daily activities, and then I see that at the utility level, I see it at the stormwater level, those dots begin to connect, and we're all working together in a common goal. I tried to get a new slide from Holly, but she's now retired and fishing, and Ed Sherwood was up with us. But they have a slide that would show actually what that right-hand slide looks like with their stormwater. And what's remarkable about this graph, really a dramatic and forceful move to advance wastewater treatment, stormwater regulations, the Nutrient Management Consortium, and now they've got still periods of time where water quality do not meet targets, but their seagrass coverage, is back to the 1940s, and I have talked to them at length. I mean, we look like that in 2006, 2007. Seagrass acreage coverage alone probably is not the only indicator we want, because now looking back, there were a lot of points of evidence that we scientists saw, but maybe we didn't communicate well enough, that we were starting to see declines all the way back into the early 2000s. But what's remarkable, if we had a line of their stormwater, it's been about even. So once they started to do that stormwater, even with all the population growth in Sarasota Bay, they have held their stormwater pretty even. So with population growth, because they had this multidisciplinary approach, they have been able to hold that stormwater increase down even with urbanization. So what's the pathway to success? And I've just put a few down. There's more. And these are the ones that I thought are the most important for us to consider as we move forward. Let the best available science, drive our decisions, but let's not wait for perfect science to take action. That reducing nutrients when we can, where we can, and especially at the high load, what I would call the common sense sites, let's go after that. We don't need to have perfect science to move that action forward. We need to constantly look at root causes, define targets where we can, and think about, and this is in the vernacular of NEPs, maybe not particularly well used in the past in some, including ours, but what is the outcome? So we have these deliverables and outputs, but what is the outcome? Is the outcome clean water? Is the outcome reduced algal blooms? So it's a very important consideration to have project by project, but also in the collective decision making that you make with projects. Don't do one thing at a time and think, well, we'll start here, see where it goes, and then move here. The timelines of these projects are going to be complicated for you. The permitting will be complicated. Take nutrient reduction where you can get it, but don't lose sight of what I would call the vision mission. Mission drift is really dangerous for all of our problems, and it's easy to get sidetracked in some area that's hot at the moment. Stay the course. If you have good science, you have a good plan, you can, move that plan around as you have already done just in the first year. But make sure that you stay in the highway, stay in that lane. And then lastly, if we're going to do aggressive, comprehensive nutrient reduction in those 4 areas, then we need to be monitoring. We need to track what's going on, because that's going to be the cash flow data that will allow us to do it better. So that's the science side. But there's another side to this, which that seems like all I'm doing these days is fighting for money, and you guys are in a uniquely, favorable position. When I talk to the other NEP directors and I tell them about Brevard County, they go, gosh, we aspire to have a county pass a half-cent sales tax that throws, $300 million to the table. You are unique nationwide in that respect, There are other counties who invested, but you are at the top of the heap on making a long-term commitment. But it's not a fix-it-and-forget-it issue. We're not going to be done with this in 10 years. We're going to have to rethink where we are in 10 years. And I think we all know that the amount of dollars on the table are not enough to do the whole restoration. And part of this investment are these other 7 pathways to success, and these are the human element. And so are we unified? Are we in partnership? Do we have a clear vision? And for me, it's clean water. If we get our water right, then everything else will follow. We can't do seagrass restoration until we have clarity. We're not going to get clams back until we start seeing some change in trophic structure and water clarity. Performance builds trust. But you can't hold trust just on performance. Honest communication and the highest ethical standards will maintain trust over the next 10 years and longer. And lastly, be surprised. We're trying to anticipate how a biological system that's complex is going to respond. And I think John Windsor will, attest to this, being a scientist. I can't tell you when this bloom ends, this brown tide. I can't tell you when it's going to begin. We're not even sure what all the drivers are, but we do know some of the nutrient drivers. And so, let's move forward, be ready to be adaptable. And lastly, we're in this for the long haul. There are no quick fixes. There are no silver bullets. I know you all are getting some pressure, as I am, about how come we're not seeing anything. You're in your first year. And so it's going to take time to get these projects underway, but it's also going to take time for the combined project impacts to start showing an impact where they're occurring in the lagoon. And so you are working in this strategy with your Save the Indian River Lagoon project plan, and you have that adaptive management structure and culture already in place. And you're doing it actually today when you look at your change projects. And so I suspect that every year you are going to go through this, and you should. This question, is the money in the right place? Where are the gaps in those dollars? What's the biggest bang for the buck? Where can we move quickly to see appreciable change in smaller areas? All of that is built into your system. And so I applaud you for having a structure that gets you there. And so where you stand right now, I think, is in a really good place. You are in a place to be aggressive, to be adaptive, to respond to the best available science, and to do it on an annual basis with your project plan and how you prioritize that plan. And while those decisions are going to be always difficult because you're going to have more projects and money, not right at the moment, but watch what happens. This project list and your dollars are going to come together, I suspect, in less than 24 months, where you're going to wish you had more cash on the table. The fact is, right now, that you shouldn't feel too concerned that you've got a reserve. That reserve could be very powerful for you in adaptive management down the line, something you need to think about. And we'll jump to the next story after we address this one. So if you want to go deep in any NEP, I will go as deep as you want. I have all 28 NEPs, plus Chesapeake Bay, plus the proposal from Perdido Sound. So I will work with you like I'm your staff, because I am your staff. Brevard invests in us so we can support you. And I'm open for questions.
Great. Courtney. And then Terry.
I saw on one of the, I think it was Tampa, where it said reduction of sewer discharges. Does that mean they're still having to do that every now and then, so have they been able to stop that all the way, or?
I can't answer for Tampa because they haven't looked at Tampa exactly, but right after Irma, I looked at all of the state reports on wastewater treatment plant failures, and some counties, you could see, had repeated problems, really large, over time. Brevard wasn't at the top of that list based on me skimming it. It's not a quantitative, but I wanted to see where those breaks were. Here's the reality of storms. And I talked to the Texas people. 53 inches in Hurricane Harvey. You don't engineer for that. And so when we had post-Irma rains, And right now, the focus is on the wastewater treatment plant failures. The fact is, every single septic tank in a backyard where standing water was in that backyard on the drain field failed. It's just less in your face. And right now, because we have a brown tide bloom, and I know citizens are going to watch this brown tide isn't known to be toxic. It's really damaging to the environment, but it isn't one of those blooms where we have to worry about toxins, thankfully. And so there's no science to suggest that it's a human health threat. But that brown color, which is dramatic, co-joined in time with wastewater treatment plant failures, has caught a hot nerve, which in a way I'm kind of glad about, because this wastewater treatment plant discussion, needs to happen, but you cannot engineer a perfect wastewater system or any water system where failures are not going to happen. Down in Indian River County, they just had a pipe burst right at the head of Bethel Creek. The pipe had a 50-year, I think it was galvanized, had a 50-year life cycle, and it was in year 20, and it turns out that the water table, and this is conjecture, may have gotten it into a zone of salt water where they were getting saltwater intrusion and increased corrosion. And so if I was talking to you all as utility directors, I'd be saying, my guess is that whatever you think your shelf life is on your system, it's probably less in Florida, because we have such a dramatic challenge with saltwater intrusion, with the kind of sediments we have, that if you thought you were going to get 50 years out of the system, you probably won't. And we need to be thinking about that network from the house to the trunk line, which is the owner's responsibility, and then those main lines. And so we're always going to have failures at times. The goal should be zero defect, but the reality is pipes break.
Okay, and Terry, and then Charlie, and John.
So 3 things. Thank you so much. This is a superb presentation, and I don't know if we have any press in the public sector, but we need to do, I think, quick turn on this, because I think this is important information. I think it's valuable. I think it's very timely, and it emphasizes 2 things that we talk about all the time. It's a long haul, and success is possible.
Yes.
And so I would like to see us do something to get that story out there. The second thing has to do with Puget Sound. My son and his family are in Seattle. I know that they have a rigorous composting program. My son just built a new house. They have no garbage disposals, and I don't know if that's by restriction or just their choice. But in talking about our public outreach education programs, maybe something we should think about adding is, just as individual footprints, let's reduce the amount of stuff going into the garbage disposal. I know we've changed our lifestyle. More stuff gets scraped into the into the waste, go into the landfill, than we allow to go down the garbage disposal. Just trying a little bit, reduction in the nutrient load.
No, it's a good point, and I'm going to take my NEP director hat off and put my Duane De Freese, lived here 40-year hat on. Dr. Barilla is in the audience, just had a paper on nutrient loads. Brian LaPointe has been on this with septic to sewer. Just 2 weeks ago, I gave a presentation to it's the Florida Undergraduate Research Conference, which just happened to be here in Brevard County for the very first time at a state college. And there was a paper there that was showing human antibiotic resistance in Indian River Lagoon sediments. And so when we think about the human waste stream, and I'm not talking just Lagoon, but it's Florida, we have the system, the network. Then we have the septic system that I believe should be on the network or should be at an advanced, treatment stage. And so septic shouldn't be the wastewater treatment of first choice. You're going to look at it when it's the only choice, available. But the worry I have is when you start looking at kind of the exemptions to some of those waste stream deliveries. So reclaimed water, biosolids spreading on land, and then all the stuff we know that comes through the wastewater plant that we're not addressing yet, these emerging threats, estrogenic compounds, antibiotics, the dissolved organic pollutant load. I don't think it's unreasonable as a citizen or a scientist to expect in a 21st century that we will be moving towards, very quickly, a human waste stream that does not connect to groundwater or surface water. That should be the aspiring goal. So that's my Duane editorial for the night, for the day.
One more quick one, and that is, early on in your presentation, you distinguished between loads and concentrations. Maybe it's a sidebar conversation, but I'd like to understand that.
Okay, and this is, people get confused about this, especially when they look at TMDL and numeric nutrient standards. And so the best example I use is, when we're discharging from Lake Okeechobee. So if that discharge, and let's use phosphorus as an example. So if the target was like, 0.01 and the discharge is at 0.05, you go, well, concentration, it's not that much. If we narrow it where it's just 1/10 of a milligram per liter, you go, oh, it's not that much. But you multiply that by 1 billion gallons of water today and look at total load, all of a sudden you're looking at massive total loads. And so we need to think, when we're looking at managing a system, at both, but when we're actually doing those reductions, total loads aren't just the issue, but I think most of our scientists will agree it's not just nitrogen, it's the suite of nitrogen. Is it ammonium, and what's that driver? Is it nitrite, nitrate? And I will tell you that I am particularly concerned in estuary situations that we don't have more conversations about phosphorus. And John Treffery has told me anecdotally that when he was doing his dredge muck fluxing study, which I think you all paid for, at least Brevard County, that during that last brown tide bloom, he watched phosphorus deplete to almost undetectable as that bloom subsided. And so there are multiple nutrient considerations, and then a whole world of science that we won't go into today about how viruses interact with some of these blooms. That's the emerging kind of that biological control, and we're right at the beginning of trying to understand that.
Can I add to the load versus concentration discussion? So if you have a big, wide, open connection to the ocean, like Tampa Bay to the Gulf, then what any organism is experiencing is the concentration of pollutant going by, because it goes by and then it's gone. When you have a very enclosed system like the Indian River Lagoon, where the residence time is very high, then even if you have a low concentration of pollution going in, everything that goes in stays in, and it just builds and builds and builds. And so what the organisms are responding to is that accumulation of load that just grows and grows.
And with the current brown tide bloom, if you look at the maps, 528, large causeways, constricted natural flow, 520, even more. So you've got Merritt Island, you've got Cocoa Beach, and then you've got this segment of the lagoon that is causeway restricted as well. And so another example of, a hot spot for at least this Oreo umbra bloom, where you can almost see that relationship. Even though it's not scientific, it's almost common sense that the longer it resides, the more you're going to see this load buildup and concentration simultaneously.
Charlie, did you still have a...
Yeah, Duane, thanks for the presentation. And it seems like, as you discussed all the best practices that the other estuary programs are doing, that we've hit on a lot of those. So we had a report card. It sounded like we'd be doing pretty good with our strategy so far. So that was good to hear. And the thing that kind of bothers me, though, is that, we're leading Brevard County, as you stated, but we have all these other entities, other counties and municipalities bordering the lagoon that don't seem to be contributing as much. And I guess I didn't hear anything from Virginia in her overview about state legislature, what they're doing for us. And I don't think we got any more funding this year, although there were many promises made. So I think we're doing good, but this is a really big effort that we're going to need more help. And I don't know how to go about getting that from our committee, but it's something that, we still need to get our legislators, our leaders, to go do the job as leaders to help us here.
I'll address that in the next segment, because I think it's a relevant and particularly timely question.
Okay, and John?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of original ideas. What I'm about to go through reflects a early morning conversation with Dr. De Freese. And he used a phrase that I wrote down and I was going to use. It's not one and done. This committee and our trust fund and the funding for it expires, if my math is right, at the end of FY26. Fixing the Indian River Lagoon doesn't. And I think it is a useful thing for this committee to do, to think about what happens after the money gets cut off. And the way I would suggest we do that is to consider an addendum to next year's update of the Lagoon plan that deals with the long-range implications of the Lagoon situation, its impact on us, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would suggest, I don't think we need a motion. I think instead we should hear what staff has to say, perhaps at the next meeting. I would suggest that there be an undertaking this year to create that addendum, to bring in Tetra Tech, because they're the smart guys that have been advising us, to make whatever connections are useful and mutually agreed on with the NEP, with MRC, and with other bodies that also are capable of taking a long-range view. And humans aren't naturally creative, but humans are really, really good at making something that exists better. If we get a stake in the ground in next year's Lagoon plan, I think by the time we get to the end of 2026, we're going to have a pretty solid roadmap going forward from there. So is that enough suggestion to you to think about it and come back to us when you're ready? And if there are budget implications in the funding for Tetra Tech, I would suggest you look first at your discretionary fund, hold your mouth right looking at the education communication component, and if there's more money needed, come back to us.
Okay. And, okay, John?
Wayne, I think the question is, are we doing enough from your view? I listened to nitrogen reductions of 50% and 60% in other locations around the country. And if I'm reading correctly, our goal over 10 years is a reduction of input of nitrogen of 750,000 pounds. And if I exclude atmospheric deposition, we're dumping 3 million pounds right now in. So that's a goal, 10 years, to reduce the input by only 25%. And all these successful ones accomplished 50 and 60%. So should we be focusing more on the reduction of input into the lagoon versus worrying about what we're going to do later? Have we set our targets high enough, and are we going to achieve them? I keep hearing wastewater treatment, which is somewhat outside of our purview, but certainly needs to be addressed. Septic to sewer is in our program, but we're only talking about reducing less than 10%, removing less than 10% of the septic systems that we, the county, say are a problem. Does that number need to be higher? And do we need more addressing on the stormwater problems? So
let me answer that question in the time frame. Are we doing enough today? I think we're getting ready to get there. Have we done enough? It's easy to do this in retrospect over the last 25 years. No. And in fact, we should have been doing this stuff, 20 years ago and right up to this point. But when we talk about the we, I think you're actually talking about the Save Our Lagoon, program, and you're not alone in this. And so we've got a project list that was done by St. John's River Water Management District on large stormwater reduction projects that don't appear in any of your data. 9 projects. If you take the one that's related to Everglades restoration out, 8 projects, about $600 million, massive reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus. And so I think we need to be thinking about the we and the collective we And if everything goes the way I hope and intend it will, as we go through, and you'll see this in a minute, the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, that before the end of this calendar year, will better answer that question, because Tetra Tech is also serving as our consultant on that CCMP. And so we've got, that utility side in the regulatory world, which is one bucket of funds. We've got what you are all doing in Brevard County. There's activities in the other counties. I think we're getting there, but we need to have a higher standard. And so doing the minimum isn't going to get us to where we want to be. We're going to have to encourage that other portion, which is the voluntary compliance. And so every person who's dumping fertilizer like crazy still, needs to start changing their behavior. And so right at the moment, I think you have a good start. But I think every year we're going to have to ask that question and watch that trend line, because, look, I'm not getting any younger. I see this in a 10-year framework from my personal position. I would like to see water quality shifting in a demonstrable way, in 10 years. Is that realistic? I don't know. Is it possible? It is. But it depends on how hard we go at this to get those nutrient reductions down. I suspect that it will be longer, but even a decrease in the frequency and intensity of these blooms will allow for recovery of seagrasses. And I have some good news from the watershed as of like yesterday. Some of my trusted fishing guides are seeing little sprouts of seagrasses where water is clear. And so this system will recover if we give it a break. And the one place we can give it a break is in nutrient pollutant loads.
To add to that, and that's a great question, the 25% reduction, we absolutely must continue to question, is that enough? Is that the right target? And we plan to do more of that in the next annual revision. But that's on top of a lot of wastewater treatment action that has previously happened. And so, quoting Pete Barill's paper, recent publication, we used to discharge 200 million liters per day of secondarily treated sewage to the lagoon. 200 million liters a day. What we experienced during Hurricane Irma aftermath was 20 million gallons total. So the 25% reduction is on top of a decade and a half of consolidating packaged treatment plants and increasing the treatment of our existing wastewater treatment plants, and that's not captured in this 25%, and I believe it is captured in Tampa Bay's work in New York Harbor. So these other plans have captured that, and we haven't.
So because some of us don't translate liters and millions of gallons equally. Okay, so 200 million liters per day is roughly 50 million gallons?
Yeah, 40 to 40 million gallons.
So we used to put 40 to 50 million gallons every single day into the lagoon. We don't do that anymore, but the Irma event added 20 million, or one half of one day is what we used to do.
Yes.
Okay.
But that was over the whole lagoon, and Brevard County did 20 million, so this is a very, very strong amount within a small area.
The 50 million was over the entire lagoon?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And it's also important to note that the city and even the county are doing projects that aren't referenced in this plan too, because they're not receiving funding, so we are doing...
So we can try to spend the next year to quantify those other things that have happened, so you have a better picture of how this fits in with what the level of reductions that have been required in other estuaries around the country.
And we're struggling with that in 5 counties, trying to figure out all those moving parts to try to build a better nutrient budget on the, the mediation side. So we'll get there. But a lot of this, the utility guys aren't talking to the stormwater guys, and so we're pulling some new data sets together that may not have been combined in the past, and QA/QC on this is important. We don't want to get it wrong.
Is the paper that you're referring to, is that publicly available?
Yeah, in fact, you've got it. You can distribute it.
Okay, great.
John's got a question.
John?
Real quickly, John, you said we're only targeting 25% reduction, and they mentioned all these others. But that's over a 10-year plan, and Duane's examples all were 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 years of reductions in those numbers. None of them did it in anywhere close to 10 years.
John, in Tampa Bay, the 60% reduction of total nitrogen was done in 12 years.
I appreciate the discussion, but you're not on camera, and
Yeah.
That's not accurate, though, what you said.
Thank you.
Okay, and Courtney, did you have your hand up?
Not good.
John?
There's something I meant to bring up at the end of the meeting when we do round robin here, but since it's been teed up, let me put it forward now. The trust fund is not the only game in town with regard to wastewater and with regard to stormwater. There's a big community interest in what the heck is going on and how we're going to fix it and where we're going to find the money. I've brought this up before. I think it's worthy to consider again, if nothing else, to protect the trust fund. That perhaps it would be a good thing if staff came forward with a simple spreadsheet that says, these are the entities that deal with stormwater, these are the entities that deal with wastewater in the county, here's where they get their money, here's how much money there is, and also give some thought to the state and federal grant environment, because otherwise uninformed citizens and greedy politicians are going to turn to the Lagoon Fund, the trust fund, rather than looking in their own budgets, raising their sewer fees, chasing grants harder, and doing other things to take care of responsibilities that reside with them. I think we need that report, and I don't think it needs a motion. If, Virginia, you think that's a useful thing to think about. And it takes more than a month, it takes more than a month. But we're seeing, let's call it poaching. We're seeing poachers in the weeds, and we need to pay attention to them.
We can work on that.
You good with that? Okay.
I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, before I start this presentation, I think it would be appropriate to just do a quick update on, what happened in Florida. A number of bills passed. Of course, we still don't have the governor's, decision. But we did have two bills that are worth mentioning. And they are, the IRL Council Board of Directors is on record, and you have our legislative position paper before you about the need for matching state funding. And so, looking back at land acquisition, one of the most powerful things you can do is local cost share match. And so we were hoping that we were going to get heard on a $50 million recurring request. If you see Senator Mayfield, you should thank her. She sponsored that bill in the Senate. If you see Representative Harrell from down the southern portion of Lagoon, you should thank her for the House version. And to my knowledge, every Indian River Lagoon House member, supported that House bill, but they basically didn't get heard. And so we will be coming back, having that conversation once again. The Water and Land Legacy Trust Fund is, I think, getting somewhere between $750 to $900 million a year, and we believe, at least I believe, that recurring source of funds can and should have some dedicated funding recurring to the estuaries in the state of Florida, including the Indian River Lagoon, because one of the messages from all 28 NEPs is that without a stable source of recurring funds, this work doesn't get done, the projects don't get done, and especially the complicated multi-year projects just simply don't move forward. And so we'll be back in 19 trying to see, where that legislation will go. All right, quickly, because I know you've got work to do, I want to just give you a quick update on where we are with the reorganization of the NEP, how you fit in, and how we fit in with you. So we are in year number 3 of a complete reorganization of a national estuary program, which is not something you see on a nationwide basis. Year number 2 was in response, to the algal blooms and recognition that the local governments wanted a greater leadership role and a greater ability to kind of steer where we went from here. Year number 2, we rolled out a new brand. We've been working on projects. We tried to stay at, I think John said it a number of meetings ago. We were, just like you, building the plane while we were flying it. And we are in year number 3, which is focused almost exclusively on implementing the projects under contract, but the most important thing we do under authorization of the Clean Water Act is to develop a comprehensive conservation management plan with stakeholder input. It is a consensus plan that serves as a plan for the whole lagoon for the next 10 years. And being dedicated by Congress is a pretty unique feature. And so we have the power of both that EPA and that reauthorization with the mandate of not just building this consensus plan, but tracking its progress and serving as a facilitator, being that edge agency to work with you all in each of the counties, all 38 cities, to try to move that plan forward in its implementation. And so the new structure looks like this. You have a Citizen Oversight Committee. I have multiple Citizen Oversight Committees. So I've got a Management Board, which has a Finance Subcommittee that's over 30 people that meet quarterly. I have a STEM Advisory Committee, which is 22 research organizations, 1 member each representing the organization, 1 member representing kind of the private sector, and 1 that we kindly called the emeritus, kind of the old scientists we wanted at the table who are, at retirement, because there's a knowledge there you don't want to lose. We have a Citizen Advisory Committee representing all 5 counties, and then we have this incredible set of resources, including your staff. So Virginia doesn't sit in this organizational structure because we did not want to have staff members constrained inside sunshine in these meetings so they could talk to anybody they wanted at any time. So a lot of the input is coming from the outside in, both at those committees and to us. And so when you look at this in unison, we have over 100 members meeting on a quarterly basis, talking to us on a daily basis in some cases, to advise where we move forward. And I wanted to show this slide because I keep getting asked, so what's the difference? Why should we think the next 25 years with the NEP will be any different than the last? And it's because of you. The fact is, this is the first time we have cities fully engaged. And you notice we have 3 leagues of cities at the table. 5 of the voting members in the council are elected officials from the 5 counties. This was a top-down kind of structure in the past, and now it's bottom-up. And so that combination, that is transformative in a business model, but also how we are operating with you all in kind of communicating where we go next. We also have this innovative, and I'm going to make a request here, access point. It's called the Innovator and Investor Network. And you'll see the diversity of the Brevard County. You'll notice there are very few other entities. We're just starting to gain some market share in the other 4 counties. But Port Canaveral came to us with a $100,000 check and basically said, we want you to look at how to do education better. And you met Dr. Martha Monroe, and she is beta testing a survey right now at Brevard Zoo, which we will share with all of you to figure out where that knowledge is. We just finished the Beach and Board Fest with Ron John, where we're getting dollars to do some communication outreach. And Harris Corporation has been an amazing partner in looking at innovative new technologies and remote sensing, sensor technologies. In fact, I ran into those guys coming back from Washington, D.C. And so we're looking for the industry sector to come on board in any way they choose. Because we need to have them at the table. A lot of times when we're looking for funding, it's not the message, it's the messenger. And I see that very, very clearly up in Washington, D.C. So we always had 4 goals. And the problem with goals is that occasionally goals kind of get you in the weeds, and they're not aspirational. And the goals have been pretty clear. You know, healthy water and sediment, healthy estuaries, supporting, you know, biological and ecological commerce, recreation, heightening public awareness, coordinated interagency management, long-term funding. But what was missing in the past, I think, was those larger aspirations. And our management conference, which is the way we work, and consensus, all those people make the decisions. I don't make any decisions. You know, all we do is convene the conference, and everything that comes out of this NEP is going to be from those 100 individuals and the people behind us and the people who are listening, who are weighing in with their ideas, and that CCMP will be driven. But we felt we needed some aspirational goals, and here they are. Healthy ecosystem, healthy community, healthy economy. The mission, which you will see, which really we hope you will embrace, because we see this as the Lagoon's mission, not the NEP's mission. One lagoon, one community, one voice. You can't do it alone here in Brevard County. Satellite Beach can't do it alone in Satellite Beach. You know, we've got, you know, 5 counties, 38 cities. If we're all together in this, you know, we can move both the funding and the policy issues at the state and federal level. And we took a high bar for promise, clean water. And so that's what we're moving towards. This is what we're doing right now. And remember, I have a staff of 2, so there's 3 of us handling the entire NEP. We're among the smallest NEPs in the nation. We have 42 projects underway as we speak, representing about $8 million of project activity. About 30% or so of that is coming from the NEP, because we're also contributing to septic to sewer projects that are way bigger than our $2.1 million budget would fund on its own. We have RFPs that are in review, and there's a number of you in the room who are helping us with those reviews. Restoration, science and technology, community resilience up in that upper left quadrant, and down in the citizen knowledge and attitude side, we've got citizen engagement. I can't remember when our small grants program ends for the first cycle, but I want this on the record. We're going to do 2 cycles of small grants. One is just getting ready to complete. One will be probably released again late summer, early fall. We've appropriated $50,000 for each of those cycles, $500 to $5,000, easy entry. But we're going to demand that each one of those proposals has clear deliverables and outcomes. And there is a gap there for not just science teachers, but even researchers who need a piece of equipment. You know, we're hoping we have a large number of, you know, of respondents. I think we got 85 proposals in the large RFPs. Comprehensive conservation management plan is underway. Communication plan is being updated. A monitoring plan will get started, but we're going to go probably deep into 2019 trying to figure out what that actually should look like. And we have a coastal resilience plan underway as we speak, and we'll be able to share with you the vulnerability assessment probably in the next few months. And then down in the one community side, it's all about bringing our communities together, engaging them, and making sure that we have adequate resources at local, state, and federal levels to get this job done. So we are busy. That CCMP revision is underway, and I wanted to give you a highlight. Next week, we're going to have our STEM AC meeting. It'll be the first time that the STEM AC sees where we're going with some detail. On the record, I want to thank Dr. John Windsor. I've used John as my kitchen cabinet on this to weigh in early to make sure I was heading down the right path. And he spent a considerable amount of time, you know, counseling us and also giving us some great suggestions. So John, we appreciate it. My weekend will be that incorporation. But we're going to be taking 22 action plans that were kind of around 85 recommendations in that 2008 CCMP and changing it dramatically. But almost all of these action plan categories will hold. They'll just be looking a little different to the moment. And so I wanted to give you kind of a highlight of where this is going in the timeline, because we need each of you to feel fully comfortable to weigh in on this plan. I've already promised Virginia and the all 5 counties, that the plan has to align, with projects and programs already underway, because the rubber hits the road here. Our planning is a higher level, so we're not going to tell the counties or the cities what to do, but we're going to set the high bars for how to get there. But we are doing something different, really unique among most of the NEPs. We are building a project list. All 5 counties have given a list of projects, 36 out of 38 cities. We're working with our restoration team members. It's inclusive, and it will be iterative like yours. It will be a project list that will morph, but we won't be making the priorities. We just want you all to see the whole picture of interest and needs. So this is where we're headed in this story. So everything is going to fit into one lagoon, one community, one voice. One lagoon is going to be all of that ecological, biological, how does the system look stuff. In the one community, it's going to be the social, the infrastructure, the emergency management. And in the one voice, it's going to be the communication pieces. And we look at the CCMP as kind of broaching through all 3 of those, because really a CCMP is to advise what the next 10 years looks like in these priority areas. So I just list the categories. They will wind up being prioritized by our management conference, but I can tell you nutrient reduction is going to be one of those high priorities. It's going to be a centerpiece of this CCMP, because it's already a centerpiece inside the management board and inside the STEM AC with our RFPs. And so you can see all of the issues that we will address specifically, especially the ones that go beyond your area of responsibility and authority. In one community, we are looking at everything from trash to marina and boating issues. And I do want to bring up a nutrient issue. And I'm going to just bring one example. In the last year, there was a sting operation on O'Galley in those marina sites, and a number of individual boats were cited for raw sewage discharge on a regular and negligent basis and a daily basis. I still get phone calls that this is occurring, and so I suspect this is a bigger issue. And think of one boat as being one home with one homeowner. That is also a direct nutrient input that we're going to need to get a handle on. And I've talked to DEP. There's a lot of activity in reorganizing some of the coastal issues. And so we know we need to address that issue, both at the Clean Marina site and the liveaboards. And also emergency preparation and response. NEPs are at that edge. And we are trying to figure out how we can better assist local communities in pre-storm planning, post-storm emergency response. And then the one voice, and you'll see a lot of overlap, health assessment and trends, innovation and technology, which we're already funding, that MUC study in Satellite Beach with Dr. John Treffery to look at nutrient flux and what aeration does. And so while we don't have a lot of money for this, we are the place where, innovation that has some potential benefit. If we need to do a pilot study, we need to be communicating with your staff to make sure that we're thinking ahead to make sure those studies get done. And of course, long-term restoration. And I have promised Virginia, and I will promise you, and I've promised the board members from Brevard and all the other counties that we will be in alignment with you. We cannot have discord between our big view and what you guys are doing on the ground. And so you should feel very strongly to do the same kind of critical impact and input with us that you do with your own staff when these drafts start emerging. We've trademarked, we're about to trademark this Lagoon Friendly brand. We were going to share it widely. We just didn't want it on a corporate America t-shirt where we couldn't access it with our friends. So just like the One Lagoon, we see this as our ability to support you, because messaging is important. We had a long workshop yesterday in DC on this, and message drift is a problem for all big programs. And so public gets confused. We have Be Friendly Lagoon, we've got Be Floridian now, H2O, Blue Life, so we need to get our messaging down. John has been a long proponent of this. We'll work with you to do our best to help that integration. And we have adopted your language. I think your staff was incredibly intuitive when they said, let's take action items like what do we remove, what do we reduce, what do we restore, what do we respond. We have added 4 more because they overlap into the larger areas of what we are in authorization to do. What research do we need to fill those knowledge gaps? You don't restore wastewater treatment plants, you rebuild them. And so how do you rebuild infrastructure? How do you build resilience into communities, which I would argue is everything we do? Hardened wastewater, hardened stormwater, doesn't only help the lagoon, it helps flooding and a whole bunch of other issues. And then how do we report back? And so responsibility and resolve are critical. We have a tough time managing expectations, just like you. Public's angry, and rightfully so. They want to see a clean lagoon. They want it fast. There is no quick fix to this. And we're going to see recurring algal blooms for some time until we get out in front of this nutrient load issue. And so we need to manage expectations. And in managing expectations, we also need to make sure that the investment is there at all levels. And so I've already shown you this, but how do we know? Tampa Bay is the best example of how we know this can be done. Dr. Burrill was about ready to say it, but Tampa Bay did a lot of focusing and early regulatory decision making on moving kind of the whole wastewater stream to advanced wastewater treatment. We haven't done that lagoon-wide. We have a lot of secondary treatment issues. We've got a lot of reclaimed water issues. So we have opportunities, and we are starting at a place that's ahead of most of those programs I've showed you, because we've had 20 years of land acquisition and habitat restoration on the edge. But as John said, 10 years isn't going to do it. In fact, there is no date on this. This is going to be like economic development, tourism development, and community development. We need to be doing Indian River Lagoon restoration as part of a community development long-term strategy. Whether it's funded through this process or another, it doesn't matter. As our population grows, this is part and parcel of 21st century community development. And so this doesn't go away 10 years from now, or 20, or 30, or 50. This is part of infrastructure planning for clean water. So any questions about where we're headed? In front of you, you've got 3 pieces of information. Number 1, our annual report. We apologize that it was a little late, but we do what we have to when we have to, and some of the other things happen a little longer than we want. But thanks to my staff, that annual report not only gives you a map of all the projects we've funded, we have highlighted some of yours and some of the projects in all 5 counties. We will continue to do that. You have a report on the Association of National Estuary Programs, and you have a report on our legislative piece. And I'd like to make an invitation. So just standing here, I thought, we meet with the ANEPs and all the national estuaries twice a year. So I'm going to make an invitation without asking permission of my other 27 NEPs. In the fall, we will have our tech transfer meeting. It's out in California. And what I'd like to do is see if I can't get Virginia on that agenda to get Virginia face-to-face with those 28 other NEPs. Close that gap. They need to hear what you all are doing, but I think me telling you, what they're doing and having Virginia be able to work that room would be an incredibly valuable asset. So I'll make sure that happens. And thank you.
And do you have a question?
I just want to make 2 comments. One, brilliant. Thank you.
Yes.
And the second, without going through the full lecture of what there is to a quality system, we're seeing the fourth and final stage, and that's convergence. We're starting to see convergence on a lagoon basis, and we're starting to see it on a National Estuary Program basis. Thank you.
Well, thank you. To be honest, I don't think we'd be where we are if you weren't where you are. And so this sometimes better lucky than good on the timing. Our timing is perfect, and we want to get a chance to do this again with the lagoon. This is our one chance in history to turn this around before this becomes a stable regime shift where recovery is impossible. So this is it. It's us. Thank you.
Thank you. We need a 5-minute break. Everybody back in the room promptly at 10:30.
John must have made us go for that.
Missing a couple of...
You gotta put him in his
lost
place.
some people.
I had to know there was going to be a lot of chatter after that.
I know. That was a lot. That was a lot to absorb, and lots of stimulus for further discussion.
Maybe 5 minutes should have been 10.
I just think we might have more coming up here.
John, as you probably heard, something he wants to do. I just told him that he should tee it up, and that I will make the motion for him since he can't.
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with him, but that's the way to get in front of
You
him.
know, so we, this sample motion was developed for us. That can be added to.
Well, I think I would suggest we make the main motion and look for amendments, and then.
So make the main motion with
It says we do.
following.
No, we don't know what the following are until we voted on them as amendments, and we don't know what the amendments are. We can't entertain amendments until we got a main motion.
Okay, so we're going to pass this, and then we're going to talk about it.
And then see if there are any changes that we want to make. I'd be happy to do the topic.
Okay.
If you tee it up for me.
Okay, and just so I get the Robert's rules right.
You get an amendment, it gets a second, you discuss the amendment, you open up for public comment on the amendment, you vote on it, and if it passes, it changes the main motion. And Robert's rules allows you to entertain 2 amendments at a time.
But so
Nobody says do it.
the amendments come after you, and
Yes.
this motion is over.
You have to have a motion and second before you can entertain amendments to
And then we
it.
have discussion.
And only do 1 amendment at a time.
Okay.
Because doing 2 is bad. So, let me help you get this one started. and
Okay,
go from there.
good. I think everybody is back. Everybody take a seat, please. We've still got a sizable agenda ahead of us. Hi. Okay. Marcy, Frick, Tetra
It's great
Tech.
to be back. It's been about a year since I've attended a meeting in person, but I do want to let you know I have watched every single meeting. I have listened, I've learned, I took notes, and then I coordinated with the county, and we made that list that was presented at the last meeting and things that needed to change as part of this update. So I'm here today to kind of give that higher level picture of where all of those changes went and to answer any questions you might have. So one of the biggest comments we got was when we did the supplement last year, it was a little difficult to have the original plan and a completely separate document. So we took that to heart, and we have reorganized the table of contents, and now we're trying to tell that full story of starting with the background, the original plan, what we changed in 2017, what we changed in 2018, and then that summary of where the plan gets us today. So that was the goal, was to try to keep that whole history with changes. Hopefully you all are with us on that flow. So I'm going to go through each of these sections. There's 7 sections and then the appendices, and just highlight the main areas where things changed or were added based on your feedback. So section 1 is the background. This is largely the same background information. The one thing we did is there's a new section 1.2. This was previously section 5 of the original plan. We just moved it up to tie in with the other economic information and have that all in one place. Section 2, which is the approach, that talks about the area we're focused on and how we looked at the loads. There were no changes there. We have not changed our overall approach at this time. And section 3, which is the high-level discussion of the different pollutant sources, there were just minor wording edits, and these were mostly to add some of those other sources you all have talked about this year, like the grass clippings and the lack of some stormwater pond maintenance and those sewer laterals. So just to add some of those details to that. The area where there was the biggest change was section 4. This actually gives them the details on all of the projects. So what we did try to do again is maintain that history. So we tried as much as possible to keep these as the original projects from the plan and talk about in the 2017 and 2018 sections where we made edits. So starting with the reduced projects, we started with the public education and outreach. The fertilizer text is largely the same. In going through and looking at this in more detail, we realized it was a little confusing. We had one table that was referenced to growing year, and then everything else was based off of the amount of fertilizer used by fiscal year. So we updated that growing year fertilizer use table to fiscal year just so it was the same numbers throughout that section. We also added a new paragraph noting that you all had requested that the original funding amount be distributed over the full 10 years of the plan, where we had it just in the first 5. We also added all of the new education campaigns, the grass clipping, excess irrigation, stormwater pond maintenance, and the septic system maintenance. If you look at the grass clippings and the excess irrigation reduction numbers, they're a little bit different than what was presented at the meetings. Looking at it, we did add some attenuation factors to factor in that there's some natural attenuation that's going to occur. One is the grass clippings break down on their way to the lagoon, and then for excess irrigation, that was focused on how much fertilizer is running off, and so we used the same attenuation factors we used in the fertilizer section to be consistent. So those numbers are slightly different. We did note next to each of these that they were added in 2018, since those were not part of the original plan, but we did want to have that full story of these are some of the new project types we're introducing. The next reduced project were the wastewater facility upgrades. There were just some minor edits here. We decided to list all of the facilities within the county in Table 13 and show who's at what concentration. Before, we just focused on any of those that were above the 9 milligram per liter that the turf grass could take, that we were focused on trying to reduce those higher loads. We also updated the attenuation to be 75% after we completed the plan. We had based the attenuation factor on a report that DEP had put together. Then they updated that shortly after we adopted the plan. And so future projects are based on that 75% attenuation, so we fixed those calculations. We also noted in Table 14, when we did the original plan, we actually did not have the correct flows and nitrogen concentrations for the City of Melbourne facility. When they came to you all this year to ask about including their project, we realized there was that error. So again, we were trying to keep this part intact of here's what it was originally, but we did want to note there was an error here. You'll see why now they're added in 2018. Section 4.1.3 is new. This is the sewer laterals projects. And again, it does note that we added this in 2018. The next section is on septic system removal and upgrades. The actual projects are largely the same. It was just a lot more trying to add some language to clarify how we are implementing these projects moving forward. All the reductions were based on assuming they were single-family residents. We have now been getting some projects for some commercial facilities, apartments. So we explained that we're adjusting those estimated load reductions using the flows from those other types of septic systems. We added some more details. This year we split out septic system connection versus septic system connection by extension. So it's either you have to extend the sewer line and then connect, or there's an existing sewer line and it's easy just to connect right in. So since we have those two different types of septic system removal, we just added some detail explaining the two different options there. We received some information from the city of Vero Beach to clarify how we describe the step systems, which are another option for the septic system upgrades. And then we noted some of the issues we've discussed with permitting some of the new types of septic systems for the nutrient removal ones. The stormwater treatment section, we had made no changes there. And then the surface water remediation system, which is not officially recommended as part of the plan, we did receive some new costs from Aquafiber, so we included those in there. In terms of the remove projects for muck removal, we did, based on some of the new data that have come in, updated the areas that we can dredge for each of the projects we had previously identified, and that information has been updated in the tables and the figures in this section. We also added a new section on the treatment of interstitial water. I apologize, it was not highlighted, but it is new, and it does say in parentheses after added in 2018. The artificial flushing section was not changed. For the restore projects, for oyster restoration, we added some details about the new reductions for total nitrogen from the study that was just completed in Mosquito Lagoon. In the living shoreline section, which is where the reductions were previously, with this new study, we have the information to split out the benefits for oyster reefs versus living shorelines. Those are now two separate projects for credits. So we're explaining now those reductions and the expected benefits of each of those. Per your request, we added a new seagrass planting section. So again, it notes that it was added in 2018. St. Johns River Water Management District provided this information on considerations of the seagrass planting. In this section, you will note that there's a header for Table 46 and then a note box. The ordinance, I guess, specifically mentions that you all will focus on looking at Table 46 from the original plan, which was that big rainbow table. By adding new tables and rearranging, it is no longer Table 46, but we did want to leave a placeholder and not create a new Table 46 to eliminate confusion. So when you see that note, that's the background for that. The respond component, we didn't make any changes to that. So in Section 5, this is now the information from the 2017 Plan Supplement brought into the document. So this lists the projects that you all recommended for inclusion last year, as well as the ones that were unfunded since we were substituting. We did add a note and try to highlight those in the table, the projects that this year were requested to be withdrawn, so that we wanted to keep that history again of this is everything that was added, but look at 2018 to see which ones we pulled out. So that brings us to the new big section, which is Section 6 for this year's plan update. It starts out with the cost per pound of TN removed for each of the different project types that were allowed for the tax funding this year. It provides information, which I know you all had a few conversations on, about that these projects are providing benefits just beyond TN, even though we're focused on nitrogen for that cost share match. There's a new section on project funding to give an update on the new revenue estimates and to describe the contingency funding approach you all have talked about at a past meeting. Again, it includes a table of all the new projects that are being added as part of this update. It includes a bullet point too of those project types that were added, of the new education, the sewer laterals, the treatment of interstitial muck water that were previously described in Section 4, but just as a bullet point here, we added them as part of this update. We've also listed some of the project changes, so those include those withdrawn projects from year 0 and year 1. The county also went through the list of all those stormwater basins we had initially recommended for treatment and determined that a few of them it wasn't feasible to add stormwater treatment, or there was already a project underway, so we're going to pull those out of the plan. We also have a list of revisions. The Long Point project was done in year 0. It was originally marked for year 1, so we shifted that over to reflect that it was finished. There was one Melbourne project that was shown, I believe, in North, and it belonged in Central, so we moved that to the right sublagoon. We added back, per your request, all the unfunded projects from 2017, except for 2 of the stormwater basins that we realized were not feasible. And then, in addition to adding back the unfunded portions of the Sykes Creek and Grand Canal projects, we added the interstitial treatment. So as you did see, since we were adding everything back in, not substituting, the overall cost went up. but we were trying to keep the relative proportion of where this money was going similar. So we have the charts like we had in the 2017 update showing where that funding was going. So it is still roughly about 2/3 of the funding to the MUC and 1/3 to the remainder of the project types. Section 17 provides a summary of the plan through this update with the new projects. We provide a little more information on the TMDL development just to help clarify some of that. We provided a little bit of information on a new chart showing that for the reduced projects, a lot of that is focused on treating human waste. So this is the septic system connections, the septic system upgrades, the wastewater treatment upgrades, the sewer laterals. We updated all the tables that compared the reduced project reductions to the TMDLs to show that we are still on track to meet the draft TMDLs. We also updated the tables with the remove and restore project reductions just to show how much we were moving from that. This will need to be revised. We did realize we were missing the Turkey Creek redredging, and that's reflected in the new tables that were handed out to you all. We updated all the tables that had the summaries of the projects with the estimated reductions in costs. Again, this will need to be slightly revised to include the Turkey Creek project. And then now you have a new table 66, which was your table 46. And in the handout, you have the latest and greatest. There are two versions. Table A is the one you're used to seeing. That's in 2016 dollars from when we did the plan. And then there's a new table B that factors in inflation starting in year 2. And we used an inflation value of 3.25%, which is the construction index. For the appendices, Appendix A is the funding needs and leveraging opportunities. Nothing changed in this section, minus a little wording change, but it was previously Section 7 in the plan. We just made it an appendix in this version. Appendix B is the references. This was previously Section 8 in the original plan, and all the new references that were added for the new project types are highlighted in that section. Appendix C is the maps of the septic system removal areas that were proposed in the original plan, and this was Appendix A in the original plan, and there were no edits other than shifting which appendix it was. And Appendix D is a summary of the stormwater projects from the original plan. This was Appendix B. There was no change, but we are going to go through, and the ones that in 2018 we realized were not feasible or there was already a project, we'll go through and we'll note those in this appendix and put a footnote that as these were removed as part of the 2018 plan. And then the new Appendix E was added about seagrasses, and this has helped us to support some of the information on the seagrass planting section. So with that, those are the big changes. There were some little ones throughout. We tried our best to highlight where there were some major edits, but with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
I was going to say, first off, thank you. I think it was an excellent idea to combine the two, because I know last year when people were like, well, where's the plan and what's the new plan, and I'd have to send in the supplement, and they didn't know where it added. So the combination is great. The highlighting that you do is good, too, and if we do, whatever happens today, I hope the version with the highlight also will be prevalently displayed online so people can see the comparison rather than just the new one without having the history. And the only comment that I had, again, other than it was good, is I know we talked about substitution projects, and I know last month we talked about, well, are they substitution projects, are they addition projects? And I just would like to see if we can, as either in literature or verbally, come together with a term that we can use now or going forward that the public can use as well to not be confused on whether these are substitution projects, because they weren't substituted this year, they were addition. So I just didn't know if there was, but other than that change or that discussion, I thought it was great. I don't know how you want to handle that, Madam Chairman.
Well, and how do you see the difference in perception between substitution and addition? Could you explain that?
Yeah, so like in my mind, if it says like, what is it, number, I think it's, I'm trying to remember, on page 78, I think is where it talks about the 2018 updates. And it says, once again, the partners were invited to submit substitute projects for the inclusion. but they weren't substituted this year. They were all added. So I just, again, reading through this, I wouldn't want anybody to say, well, but the projects weren't substituted, they were added. So, and I don't know how we handle that phrasing, that communication, that term going forward, but I didn't know if
Would it
there was
just
a
be
way.
better to generically call them new?
I would offer, we had, going back to the original and then through the updates, we have planned projects out through 10 years, and I think what this committee recommends to the commission are approved projects. So we have planned projects and approved projects, and quit fussing with substitute and whatever.
Or additionally approved projects.
I don't think we need, fine, but I don't think we need additionally. I think it's just they're approved.
Okay.
I like what Terry said. It keeps it clean, and there's no reason to have an audit trail on projects.
Agreed.
So are you suggesting, Vinnie, that we would go back to what's been presented and make those changes here, or just going forward that we would?
I mean, that would be at the pleasure of the board or Tetra Tech or Virginia. I mean, whatever they want to do. I would like, at least on page 78, where it says for the 2018 plan, to use, instead of substitute projects, we could say the approved projects, were added or some way. And then going forward, use that terminology. I don't think we need to make a big...
We do have other tweaks, so I don't see why that would be a problem to make that change now.
It's not a big lift.
No.
Yeah, no, we can do a search and,
Okay. I think we can
place.
handle that inside parliamentary process.
Okay.
Can I have the floor?
Yes, you can, John.
I move that the Save Our Indian River Lagoon Citizens Oversight Committee recommend the adoption of the proposed Save Our Indian River Lagoon Project Plan 2018 update.
Second. Discussion?
I have
Starting with
perhaps
Terry.
a point of information or question or something, and that it gets to, I understand the problems you have and why you didn't go to the Microsoft Word change process to go through. I've seen what tables look like when you do that. But my question is this, is the plan as it was published originally and approved by the county, is that a controlled document? We worry about the content of the table, and we worry about updating the table and so on, but what about all this other verbiage? Is that sort of a contractual baseline? Is that what we think the voters approved, that original language? Because if it is, I think we need a more rigorous configuration management. How did this document change over time than just we got some yellows here because things taken out, for instance, don't show up, right? You don't have any way of tracking it. So the fundamental question is, do we need to have a controlled change process from the original document when the voters had their say to what we now have as the go-forward plan?
We have the original document in a PDF posted online, on the Save Our Lagoon website. And so, while that's not as easy to find the changes as if you had some giant track changes document, I think for trying to implement, we need something cleaner. But
Yeah, and we could easily create a track changes version. We started with that. It got messy quickly, so we were trying to make something readable. But if you want, just for a record, we can create a version very easily and sort of have that more behind the scenes.
Well, the question is the verbiage that's in the plan, is it important to track the changes to that verbiage? The fact that the plan had, one approach to sewers, and now we've refined that, and we have a split approach, and there's a good logic for that. But if a year from now...
So legally, the voters approved the referendum language.
Okay.
The plan was out there, available for people to review, whether they wanted to approve the referendum, based on the fact that those dollars were going to go towards implementing the plan. But the plan itself was adopted by the county commission, not by the public. Please correct me if you think I'm headed.
Right, that's my
So-
understanding, but the suggestion to have a track changes document in place for each update to the plan is good to do for historical purposes. It makes it easy to track what has changed over time, for staff purposes, and when you get questions from the public about what exactly changed.
Yeah, so-
I think that would be valuable to have both.
Yeah, I think so too. So understanding that we don't want to have for public consumption, and even for this committee, the word track changes version, because I agree with you. I mean, it is just wrenches your head around. Is there a way, the yellow highlighting for additions or changes, I think is fine. It draws attention to this is, and maybe let me suggest this, I'm thinking in real time, that's dangerous. So we have three things that happens to the document. Words get taken out, words get changed, or numbers especially get changed, or things get added. If we had sort of maybe three colors, right? So you could highlight in the document, the way we have it now, highlight those areas that are new, those areas where we've changed the language or changed the numbers in the table. That's where it would show up, I think, most frequently. And then a way, and a color coding doesn't do it, but how do we somehow capture those areas where we've taken things out? And a problem, I've done this, for 40 years, and it's a pain in the ass, but I mean, if you take something like we did with the appendix and moved it up, yeah, you took it away from here, but you added it back in here, so it got moved, but it didn't really, so you don't have to go in 5 and show we did a deletion. There's a little, maybe thinking you need to do about this, but what I'm suggesting is a compromise that's nowhere close to the word change format, much closer to what you've published, but it would somehow capture those three kinds of changes made to the document.
Okay, John, and then Courtney.
With respect, Terry, I'm aware of no legal or regulatory requirement to maintain legislative history on this. The ordinance that was passed that teed up the referendum and then engaged the plan gave authority to the county commission to update this plan once a year. The plan's a plan until the plan changes, and then the new plan is a plan. If somebody wants to figure out what happened in year 2, later on in year 7, they've got year 2, they've got year 1, they got year 3, and they can do the work. I think down this path lies madness. We are tied up with ad minutia rather than dealing with the current plan. Unless the county commission tells us that's what they want, I don't think that is what we want, with due respect.
Can I real quick on that, using technology, maybe if you just made the Word document available online, then if somebody did want to see those changes, they could run it through Word themselves using track changes, and that way we're not doing the work, but we also have the historical background that possibly that was recommended, that we keep the low-lying, underlying, and then people can choose whatever colors they want in their Microsoft Word to track changes. We don't even worry about that. Just make the actual information available and let people run with it where they will.
Okay, and Courtney?
I was just going to comment, what John said was, you have an adopted plan, and then every year you're going to adopt it, so you're going to have every single plan listed down on the website. So, that should be enough. And honestly, it would be interesting to know what's changed, but that's just what it is interesting, because at this point, once the new plan's adopted, that's the new plan, that's what we have to operate under, so,
So if the answer to the question is we don't have to track and manage the changes, that we just have a snapshot year by year that says this was the first plan, this is the revised plan for 17, now we have a revised plan for 18, then I'm fine.
Okay, John.
Thank you. The motion on the floor is to adopt the proposed plan for this year, which I apologize, I was not here at the last meeting and not able to give some input on certain sections. I want to thank you because even with the yellow changes, it required me to go back and reread the plan that the voters approved a number of times. And I'll make a general comment and then a specific request. My general comment, beginning with table number 3 of loading sources, there's about, excluding atmospheric deposition, there's about 3 million pounds of nitrogen going into the lagoon on an annual basis. And septic and stormwater account for more than any single source, but the largest single source is muck flux. And the way we've distributed the money, I'm not certain that we are not focused enough on the reduction of nitrogen as a group. We've identified roughly 41,000 septic systems along the lagoon that are impacting and putting nutrients in. And if we're lucky, in 10 years, we'll take 3,700 of them out. That means we're still going to have, of the 900,000 pounds, we're still going to have 800,000 pounds going in. And I'm not a scientist, but quite simply the way I understand things is you stop putting junk in. Doesn't matter how much you clean out, we got to stop putting stuff in. So I respectfully request that those smarter than me figure out how next year we reduce the input through septic systems primarily. That's kind of a general thing. I think we failed. That's the short answer. Secondly, and this is very specific, y'all know I'm an oyster gardener, and I'm probably the biggest supporter of this program publicly, and I've got great growth going on right now. Oysters filter, okay? They also create this awesome environment that I like to fish in. So I would like to have more oysters. We have a problem with the program here, and the Brevard Zoo specifically, and I've raised this for a year. They're unable to scale a program. We have a number of specific limitations. Number one, we have a single source supplier for spat. And if you look at the cost of spat in Maryland and Virginia, where they've been extremely successful, Chesapeake Bay program, etc., the cost of spat is just tiny. We're paying way too much, and we can only get it from one place, and that one place can't even guarantee a quantity that's required. Secondly, we're limited in the number of volunteers participating. Less than 25% of the trained volunteers in this county currently have habitats hanging off their docks. Okay? So we can't grow enough. We're limited in the number that we grow. Now, I don't know what the number is this year, okay? I've been told it's 100,000. I've been told it's 250,000. I don't know what the answer is, but in any case, based upon the plan we adopted to put 2 miles of living oyster reefs in this year, there aren't enough oysters to do it. It's physically impossible. And there's also microenvironments, which is something I learned about when my oysters did bad last year and my neighbor 50 yards away did really good. In some places they're thriving, in other places they're not. So what we have from the zoo is a series of proposals with only one Riverview, 1,150 feet, which we do have enough oysters for, using living oysters. All the rest of the proposals from the zoo this year use something that I've never heard of and that on any kind of level, significant level, have never been used. Okay? And what they say is we're going to put down oyster shell in bags with spat. That's it. We're going to put spat on oyster shell in bags to the tune of almost $600,000, or 60% of what we're allocating to the oyster program. At no significant level have we ever tried putting bags and spat. At the locations that have been identified, generally we think they're going to live there, but we don't know this. So at the least they should try it. But my motion, and I can't make one,
but I will for you.
Thank you, is that all of the Brevard Zoo proposals using an untested method and uncharted method of spat on oyster shell be removed for funding this year.
And as a member of the committee that can make motions, I don't necessarily agree with my colleague, but I move that his motion come forward as an amendment to the main motion.
And I'll second that in open discussion.
think it would be good if we had the Brevard Zoo talk to us about this before we do something like that. I mean, so maybe we make this an agenda item, you know, in the next, you know, whenever. But I don't know if I want to remove their projects without ever talking to them, you know.
Good idea.
John?
In terms of outcomes, we're desiring a living reef organisms. If they put in this project and nothing grows on it, do they get paid for anything? Because there's supposed to be metrics involved in all of these things, and it's not just feet of oyster shells.
The answer is yes, we are prepaying.
I'm not asking you.
Okay.
So the way it's structured right now is that the gardening of spat to larger juvenile oysters is paid for by existing county funds. And the distribution of those volunteer-grown oysters is paid for by existing county funds. So the plan dollars are going to building the reef structure upon which live oysters are later added with separate funding. And Jane, do you want to come up here? So, Mr. Durkee wasn't here at the last meeting when Jane presented some information on the success of different techniques and different mapping, different data collection that's occurred so far. So I'd like to bring that back up.
Virginia, can you answer Dr. Windsor's question? How's it paid for?
Yeah, so they would be paid for building the reef structure. They're paid separately for the logistics of operating an oyster gardening program, and once those oysters are gardened, they have to put them somewhere, which would be these reefs. We would look at all of the reefs that are recommended by you and approved by the county commission, look at the history of success data that we have in the lagoon, and based on that data, we would decide where is the greatest need for available gardened oysters, where do we think is the greatest likelihood of success for you build a reef, they will come, natural spat recruitment, and we will monitor these. And if we need to add more oysters, they'll move up the priority list for the following year. So
this is a map of the results of the shoreline survey that was done by UCF, and these are the locations that they witnessed oyster recruitment at survey points along the Indian River Lagoon. And it's concentrated from about 528 south, and then we added in results from oyster gardening from year 1 and year 2, and we had, and remember that wasn't, those were just, it wasn't at every 100-meter points. It was just wherever a dock was that they were in the oyster gardening program. So we had oyster gardeners that were up in Titusville, and there was actual evidence of recruitment and in their oyster gardens, as far north as Titusville. All of the projects we have concentrated around 528 south. So we feel very confident that we're going to have natural recruitment at all the constructed oyster reef sites that we build this year. And then we're going to have monitoring data of the proposed sites. And we will have monitoring that will, verify this at the conclusion.
So we're talking simply about building a reef with existing shells and bags.
Correct.
But that's not what the proposal says from the zoo. It says using spat. And the plan said building live reefs 2 miles. Listen, if we can't do it, it's okay with me that we just go, we didn't make it this year on something, okay? But that's a different plan than we approved, throwing spat. And other than a couple of places where you've stored spat, this hadn't been demonstrated. Am I correct?
Repeat that.
putting bags and throwing spat out there.
So you followed up with the zoo on what it was they actually intended to do with these projects. So when their proposal says spat on shell, what did they really mean?
I will have to talk to them and verify. I don't believe that they're just going to be putting out spat,
Well, that's what-
I don't believe that they're going to get the bags from the hatchery and then just put them out. I think they're going to be building substrate, they're going to be putting in
Correct.
reefs.
That's
And the
what's
spat from the
described.
hatchery is going to go to oyster gardeners through the oyster gardening program and to create larger oysters.
That is not what is written in the proposal.
They
On
have
every
new
one of
staff
them.
that-
It doesn't matter. That's not what they wrote. That's not what they're requesting funding for. And there's only one thing I can find in here that uses the existing 100,000 or so that the gardeners have given this year. So at the very least, maybe we can modify to say that the Brevard Zoos, these programs will be not included until they come back to us with more clarity, because as they're written, I stand with my motion.
Can't we handle this in the operational realm?
Yeah.
And hold up funding until these concerns are satisfied and come back to us then? I don't think we need to change, my argument would be we don't need to change the plan. We don't need to micromanage that particular small component of the plan right now. We've got a year to deal with it and give them a chance. And I suspect that unless they can convince themselves, the zoo, that this is really a good thing to do, they won't try and convince us. And I suspect it's a good plan.
And then Stephanie and Charles, you have your hand up.
Virginia, look, I want to go back to what you said. The plan is only paying for the substrate to put the oysters that are coming from the zoo, whatever the components are. We're not paying for the oysters. We're only paying for the substrate.
Yes.
And let me finish, please. And so, if that is the case, and for whatever reason the oysters don't grow, the substrate is still there for future years, and we haven't paid for anything that cannot be reused. And so, I don't see a problem with this. I do think it would be valuable to give the zoo an opportunity to come and address this concern, but it's not our concern because we're not paying for it. We're only paying for the substrate. And if the substrate is being placed in areas where Virginia and her team believe they're going to have success, I see no problem with us putting that substrate down, and if the oysters don't grow this year, then we readdress the situation and look at it next year. We've made an investment in those areas that is not going to go away. So I have no problem with it.
Okay, Charles, and then...
So I would suggest we keep it in the plan. If we need the zoo to come next month or whatever, we can hear more from them. But, the fact is, we're dealing with a living system, and there's a lot of variables, few of which we can control. And you know what? It may not work. Maybe even the established methods may not work. And John, you said right there was microsystems where someone down the dock down the road or the lagoon was able to work. And I thought I heard Duane talk about, we need to think outside the box. So if perhaps this is such a different, approach, maybe it is thinking outside the box. But we're going to have to try some things. And, it's one of those things that you fail fast, so you learn from these things. And maybe it doesn't fail, and you have a better opportunity to expand the program.
Okay.
Okay, 2 points. I completely agree with the idea of fail fast and small or let it succeed. And if we have the ability to talk to them about how to do demonstrations, I'll fully support it. Guys, I'm growing them, okay? You understand I support this. Regarding the purchase of substrate, we pay based on demonstrated or estimated reduction of nitrogen into the system. So I will ask Tetra to tell us what the reduction of nitrogen is for substrate, just substrate, and the answer is 0. So therefore, we should pay 0 to throw shells in the water. If something grows on it, then we do have nitrogen reduction, and our formula would allow for paying for it. But there's nothing in our formula that pays for throwing stuff in the water.
I call the motion.
Do we want to let members of the public, are there any comments from members of the public?
Yeah.
And let's restate.
Restate your motion that I made for you.
My motion was that all Brevard Zoo proposed plans based on the technique of oyster shell with spat, not living, with spat, be removed for funding from the proposal this year.
Okay.
think you have a
We have
comment.
one member of the public that would like to contribute.
Katie's with the Brevard Zoo.
Yeah, Honey's smart, let her know.
This
Come on.
Katie.
And so
This is
while
Kate, I'm sorry.
Kate's coming up, may I just add that when we build these reefs, you know, our biggest goal is oyster recruitment and oyster reef, but we know that that reefs provide a commensal environment for hundreds of species in the lagoon, and so whether or not oysters succeed in that first year or not, we know we're going to have barnacle recruitment, we're going to have mussel recruitment, we're going to have tunicates and sea squirts. You know, we're going to have a whole ecosystem going on in these reefs. And so they're going to provide structure, they're going to provide filtration, they're going to provide habitat, they're going to provide forage, and all of that combined over an anoxic substrate will also provide denitrification benefits. So it's not if the oysters don't succeed there, we've accomplished nothing. We will have accomplished quite a lot, and we can spend the next year trying to figure out how to get oysters to succeed there.
Question.
Yes.
Aren't these shoreline restoration living oyster reefs going to use the designs that have come out of FIT's research to help reduce shoreline erosion?
They're going to use the design that we developed working with University of Central Florida, that we tested multiple years now with legislative funds. FIT then developed multiple different designs and tested those. The one that worked best was our original design, and that's what we're proposing to
Okay, so my point
construct.
would be that irrespective of oyster recruitment, we're going to get some shoreline erosion reduction.
Yes, that scour and
And are these also accompanied by habitat, by mangrove planting, or are we just doing the oyster beds? It's separate, so they're not combined in any way. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, good morning, committee members. My name's Katie Laban, and I'm part of the Brevard Zoo Restore Our Shores program. I actually am the oyster gardening project coordinator, so it's my job to watch over the over 200 citizen scientists right now who are growing oysters for us off their dock. And as John said, he is one of our gardeners. He's a 2-year veteran at this point. Before you have any additional questions or concerns about what it is we do and what it is that we're trying to provide the Sorrel Plan and the Indian River Lagoon restoration that we also dearly want and want to see achieve, I would be more than happy to have our team, whether our managers or those of us who are out in the field putting these oysters out into the water and making a difference by having the community see us. We would be more than happy to come and present to you all and really lay down what it is that we want to try and achieve and what we have been able to achieve in the past. Our project has been going on since 2014 with the tremendous support of the county, and we've been able to put over 350,000 oysters back into Brevard County's waters, and we hope to only continue to increase that number through the help and support of our oyster gardeners. So before you make any decisions about whether we can help you all or not, we would be more than happy to come and speak before you all, whether at a meeting like this or a separate meeting for just you all. We'd be more than happy to.
Thank you.
Let's call the question.
Okay, Dave.
I don't know if I could invite you to bring your people here to speak with us, but in the event that you do, and I hope you do, and I hope it addresses John's questions, and I hope maybe this can be tabled until then. I don't know how fast we have to have the final draft, but when you come back, if you can have, quantifiable figures to solve, because John's going to have that question about, are we removing any nitrogen with what we're doing, with what we're funding? So if we're putting oyster shells, we're putting substrate in the water, where are we at with numbers with just that? Then what are we at with recruitment of actual oyster growth on the shells? So we have a baseline for what's going in the water as substrate, and then figures for what we hope will happen and what if something doesn't happen. So hopefully we can answer John's question, and then we can obviously hopefully fund it. I think everybody wants to fund it. We just need to have the numbers to support it.
Madam Chairman, I suggest we close debate.
Okay, so we will vote on the amendment. Do you want to read that one more time, or?
Can I turn to whomever can you read the amendment, please?
I'm trying to remember. Yes.
Exactly.
I was going to give her another shot at hearing it.
The amendment was that all zoo proposed plan based on technique of oyster,
Fags and spat.
Spat with spat, be removed from the proposed for funding.
From the proposed plan for funding this year.
Yes.
That was my motion.
That was your motion.
Okay, that was John's motion. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Okay, so we can move back to, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I have another amendment.
Yes.
I move as an amendment to change project nomenclature from substitute and new to planned and approved.
Any discussion on that? Should we vote on that amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Danielle?
I just wanted to backtrack for a second and thank John for dissecting that and figuring that out.
Yes, absolutely.
Because as an
Thank you.
oversight committee, that's huge. So thank you.
And that will allow us to dig into this more and make everything transparent so we know exactly what we're doing going forward. Thank you.
That's a minor thing. $600,000 out of $40 million, okay? What concerns me is I don't have the ability to look at $4 million contracts on a line item basis and wonder how much we're spending on things. And we just accept it, guys. We go, well, we're going to spend $20,000 a year on something, and I'm not sure, and maybe it's not our job, maybe it is, but I mean, everybody wants to get the best bang for the buck. The number one complaint that I've heard from Duane and everybody else is there's not enough money to solve the problem. We're going to have $500 million to throw at this, and it's not going to be enough. This problem started before we recognized it, as certainly the scientists maybe recognized it, some of the guides recognized it, but the public didn't recognize this problem, and it's going to take a lot to solve. I want to make sure that everything we do is directed toward, and I know everybody here does, is directed toward restoring the lagoon, hopefully before my grandchildren die.
Could we reach out to Keith and see if he would present next month, or at least come and give us some additional information on the project?
So do we have any additional amendments, discussion? Does anyone in the public have any comments at this point? Okay.
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment to the main motion. I move to save our Indian River Lagoon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You mean about this specific issue? Or
About passing this plan. We'll have general comments in a little bit. Okay.
I have an amendment. I move that Save Our Indian River Lagoon Citizens Oversight Committee recommend the adoption of the proposed Save Our Indian River Lagoon Project Plan 2018 update with the nomenclature change approved as an amendment.
Okay. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
And
Now we vote on the motion. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Move on. All right. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So a selection of the committee chair and vice chair.
Lorraine, do we need to extend the meeting? We're close to...
Okay, yeah. Let's go ahead and extend the meeting at least 15 minutes.
I move to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
Second? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, opposed? Okay, good. Selection of the committee chair. I am, as I've said before, has been a great honor to serve in this capacity on this committee, and I am so thankful that I get to continue to serve on the committee. And I'm so proud, as I know all of you are, the progress that we've made and how we've really seen this thing grow in terms of our knowledge base. I'm also happy that our bylaws include the ability to switch our chairmanship each year in March, because I personally think that's a very healthy thing for us to do. I know that we have, a number of people on here that are really legacy leaders, recognized throughout this county. But I really like the idea of developing all of us here as leaders that can speak strongly and be recognized throughout the county. And so I've thought long and hard about this, and I would like to make the first nomination. I'd like to nominate Stephanie Ailey, and I really have three reasons. I think that her remarks have been very thoughtful. She obviously is well prepared. I think she representing education, we've kind of shifted. We've seen more of an emphasis on education, and she has a lot to contribute there. And she also has a good command of Robert's rules. So, and by the way, I appreciate all of your patience with my learning Robert's rules. I also wanted to nominate, before we open it up in general, nominate David Lane as the co-chair, and my feelings there are I'm sorry, vice chair. And that's based on the importance of tourism in our county, and also some of the political discussion that's taken place talking about taking tourism dollars. And I just think having this tourism leader be able to speak in that capacity would be good for our committee and for the Lagoon. And so at this point, I'll open it up to other nominations.
I will support those nominations.
Great.
I'd like to ask if the person's nominated would like to serve in this role.
Oh, I guess we should.
You didn't do that last year.
That's not how it works.
Would you? Okay. And David?
I would be honored if so appointed to the role. I do know tourism, the sector is going to be more prevalent next year. We have moves underfoot for EDC money to be rerouted and some other things. There's going to be people in my industry that are going to be making their wishes and their desires much more public to us, I think, in 2018 than they have in the past. So there's a lot going on in the tourism sector with respect to saving our lagoon. So I do think a larger role in that industry, may be prudent. But I would, if so appointed, reluctantly accept.
And I did just want to add one thing, that everyone on here would make an excellent chair. Unfortunately, we could only choose from the members versus the alternates.
But there's 10 years and there's 7 members, so
Okay.
your time is coming.
If I could, this introduces a principle I think we ought to keep in mind for the future, which is to rotate the load of chair and vice chair on an annual basis. It's up to us and how we nominate and vote, but that smells to me like a pretty good idea, because I share the view that everybody here could play the game.
Okay, John.
I agree with you, John. One thing that concerns me is the terms of this are 2 years. And the way this thing started, we are all become term limited, if you will, at the end of this year. And I'm wondering if there's a way that they could make half of the group on a 3-year, so that we alternate, because what could happen is we could lose all the institutional memory if this entire group disappeared next year, and they'd start from scratch, which would be difficult for everybody.
But I recall reappointment is allowed.
Well, reappointment is allowed, but it's still on
Well, that's
2-year,
up to-
it's
that's
still
up to the
2-1-year, still on 2-year terms.
It's still up to the commission and the League of Cities to decide whether they want to screw it up or not.
And Christine, you would
No
verify
comment.
Yes, I can
bylaws?
verify whether they're overlapping terms. That's the question, correct?
Right. Okay. Okay, so then we'll just call for a vote. All those who support the nominations, Stephanie Ely for chair, David Lane for vice chair.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And from there, Stephanie, you can open it up for public discussion. All right.
Would anyone from the public like to speak?
Did a great job.
I'll pass out what I plan to talk about so that I don't have to cover every detail of it. My name is Jim Glass. I'm a civil engineer. I've been in practice for 40 years, 25 of which was in Tampa Bay, 5 years in Monroe County. I moved here 2000 to be close to my family and enjoy my pastime, which is fly fishing. I have several members of our fly fishing community here with us today, and we're here to give you our opinion about the plan for improving the lagoon. Oh, can I have one of these back? That's too many of them. Okay, I'm going to use this to highlight from. First of all, as an engineer, I deal in nuts and bolts and concrete. I'm very direct, and I apologize if I offend anybody with my comments, but I have some recommendations. Today, in Tampa Bay and in Sarasota Bay, you heard Dr. De Freese talk about, I was there, helped do some of the design work. In sewage treatment plants, I managed the 208 Water Quality Management Plan engineering element for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. So I'm very familiar about Tampa Bay. I am happy to say that it worked. Tampa Bay started 30 years ago. We've restored the seagrass, as you heard, to about the level of 1950. Scallops, which were never there when I moved there in 1972, are now living in Sarasota Bay and Tampa Bay. That's a real great thing. The other project I wanted to mention to you is Monroe County. Monroe County did a master plan for the connection of 27,000 septic tanks and cesspits, 435 package treatment plants to a centralized sewer plan. That started in 1998. It was finished in 2000. They've been working on it, and this year they will finish connecting all those septic tanks to a centralized sewage system. Now the coral reefs, the flats in the Florida Keys are going to start being restored. So there's hope for our estuary to recover also. It's going to take a lot of work. And my recommendations, based on my experience in dealing with stormwater and wastewater projects, are this. There are 5 counties. Dr. De Freese said there were 38 cities. I don't remember how many there is. There's like 7 federal agencies, 5 state agencies that all have some amount of jurisdiction over the lagoon. If you go online and read the plan that was developed for Monroe County, there's 126 miles of islands that make up the Florida Keys. This plan addressed the whole 26 islands. It was administered by the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority. So my first recommendation is we need a master plan for the entire lagoon so that all these cities, counties, and other agencies can come together and focus on the things that need to be done. Septic tanks. I met with the health department a couple of days ago. It's astonishing to me that the design of septic tanks is based on old data. We need to update, I know you all may not do it, but maybe you can recommend to the county commission that somebody undertake this. We need to develop new standards for septic tanks. The current law is 100 feet from the shoreline to the septic tanks. I think it ought to be 1,000 feet myself. We need to take into account the fact that we have global warming, that the sea levels are rising, that we're getting more and more storms, and currently what happens now is the water table rises when we have these storms, the lagoon gets high, the drain fields in these septic tanks drain directly into the water table, the hydraulic gradient takes that effluent directly into the lagoon, it's untreated sewage that goes into the lagoon. So we need to get rid of septic tanks. We need to upgrade our sewage treatment plants to AWT standards. The company I work for in Tampa, we took the largest wastewater treatment plant, Hooker's Point, I believe it was about 1990, and converted it to AWT standards. It took all the nutrients and all the pollution out of the Tampa Bay. They had been dumping, I don't remember the quantity, but it was millions of gallons of secondary treated effluent in the upper Tampa Bay. That was eliminated. And currently, that's part of the problem. We came up with a plan to get rid of point and non-point source pollution, which you all are working on here. But I think that one of the things we could do, she said that we are adding 100 septic tanks a year, approximately, more in just Brevard County. Why don't we have a moratorium and stop adding any more septic tanks, since that's one of the major problems, and that's just in Brevard County. I think the first recommendation I would make is that we make a priority to eliminate septic tanks and upgrade all wastewater treatment plants to AWT standards. Second, in Tampa Bay, we inspected sewer lines. We ran TV cameras through them, lighted the sewer lines for old systems where they were leaking. We checked pump stations. We tried to attack the problem of all deteriorated lines before they broke. It seems like today, what we do here, a line breaks, and then we go fix it, and it dumps millions of gallons of sewage into the lagoon. Now, another thing, this may rub you the wrong way, muck. It seems to me, from a practical person, that muck ought to be fixed after you get rid of the pollution in the bay, in the lagoon. Because as more sediments and more pollution gets in the lagoon, you're just going to cause more muck to come. Why not wait till you fix the basic problem and then address muck? I notice in your plan that roughly 50% of the annual plan is going to dredging muck. So my final recommendation is, it's going to take years for the lagoon to recover. We started in Tampa Bay in 1980-something. It's recovered today. We got a long ways to go. We're going to spend a lot of our tax money on it, and I would really like to see us concentrate on one thing, and that's eliminate the flow of human waste into the lagoon. I appreciate all your work. I've served on committees before. I know it's very hard and very difficult. You take a lot of heat. I'm sorry, but I encourage you to keep up the good work, and thank you very much.
All right. Come on.
We have some other people in our flat. Rick, you want to talk? I will. Go ahead, ma'am.
Madam Chairman, I would note a 3-minute limit on speakers.
I'm Gail Meredith from the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition, and I wanted to respond to Charles's remarks about the legislative process. We were very concerned that the proposal that we brought to our delegation for statewide funding and matching funds was not even heard in committee, and we really heard that. We have initiated a statewide coalition for the next legislative session of all, and have had in principle responses from the large nonprofits, the large influential nonprofits, and this is being headed up by the distinguished Duane Wayne Mills, former chair of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Anyway, that is a beginning, and we will keep you informed and also invite your participation with us. We are very committed to an aggressive, intense process with the next legislative session, taking also advantage of the fact that it's an election year. Thank you so much for all you do.
Can I please just say one thing on that, Stephanie? I think it's so important that the state, that they award the citizens of our county who decided to go ahead and do something about this problem. And I really feel strongly that the state should award the residents by matching some of those funds. And I think that that helps encourage other counties to then say, well, we should start a program, and that has a domino effect. So I'm really hoping this next session we're going to see something on that.
We agree. As you know, we were promised by the governor that we would receive matching funds when the county commissioners did not declare a state of emergency. And this promise was completely ignored, along with everything else that was promised. And so we have to become much more intense in our collaborative involvement statewide. Thank you.
The fact that it wasn't heard in committee.
Yes.
And they managed to pass a bill that gives our beaches to private property owners, that hands our single-family homes over to short-term rentals. All those were scheduled, but for some reason we couldn't get scheduled a bill that would give us matching funds for water quality. So
in spite of the fact that every member of our delegation essentially promised that they were going to do a full court press, and we feel very distrustful of the process, and we feel that we have to really become serious now in our community involvement to either live and tally during the legislative process or something. Anyway, we want to be involved with all of you in this.
We were proud to see you guys there. It was great to see you all.
Well, it was quite an experience.
We are coming up on our deadline.
I'm not going to do it.
So, please.
I'll be quick.
Very
brief.
quick.
My name's Rick Borman. I'm a captain, a guide on the local water share, but I spent the majority of my time in the last 20 years making my living on the Indian River Lagoon. I've seen it come and I go, and I can tell you, every 2 years, with everything that's been going on since the beginning algae bloom of 2012, the landscape of the lagoon changes dramatically. I mean, dramatically. It is unbelievable what's happened from 2007 to now, or even from 2012 to where we are today. The seagrass is gone in the Indian River Lagoon. There's small parts left in the Mosquito Lagoon, non-existent in the Banana River Lagoon. And a lot of the other people say, oh, the seagrass is coming back. A lot of people don't know the difference between seagrass. A lot of it's chloralgae that you're seeing, which is an invasive, bad thing. There's very little seagrass growing back in clean water right now. Most of it is chloralgae that is growing. The fact that there's so much wastewater, I had no idea. Last year, it's crazy how dramatically our focus point has shifted on the Indian River Lagoon from what we thought was stormwater issues to now being wastewater issues. I cannot tell you how disgusted I am in the fact that 20 million gallons since Irma of wastewater has been inundated in the Indian River Lagoon. To me, it's criminal, bottom line. And I really appreciate everything you guys are doing, but we need to ramp up our efforts, I think, a little more, because I've talked to quite a few people, Aaron Adams, a lot of different scientists. I spent a lot of time on this, and I think we're literally on the verge of the collapse of the lagoon. A lot of the fish have disappeared. The numbers of redfish that from last year to this year, it's unbelievable how small a percentage of them are. There is no sea trout left. They are gone. And I've talked to 25 guides. We've had hour-long conversations. They are not here anymore. Where places you could go and catch sea trout on a daily basis, you're lucky to get a bite a day. The fishery has changed so dramatically, and if we continue on this downward decline of these alga blooms happening and recurring, there won't be a fishery here in 10 years. It won't be. And I write everything down. I go out, I have a calendar. I've written everything down. Every time I've spent in the water for 20 years, I have a stack of books this tall. Everything. And I have it all, and I'm telling you, we are seeing very, very bad things happen rapidly, and we need to really ramp up our efforts, especially on the waste that's coming into the lagoon. It's unbelievable. I mean, I have a son who all his life wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. I took him out in the water last week, and he sat there and he cried on my boat. This is heartbreaking, and something has to be done now. Thank you.
Stephanie, I made a motion to extend another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Is there a second?
Hi, my name's Jack
We don't have a
Bradman.
second.
Pardon?
We don't have a second, do we?
Second.
All those in favor of extending the meeting for another 10 minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Say aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
All right.
Okay, my name's Jack Radaman. I live at 568 East Hall Road. I've been a resident of Merritt Island since 1957. And I've come here to talk to you about the muck dredging project that this Oversight Committee is supposedly oversighted and that's going to put out to our area. Does anybody know the particulars of it? Somebody in here tell me. Well, I'll tell you. They're going to pump 8.5 miles to North Merritt Island, 6,400 cubic yards of muck, and they're going to deposit it in a 65-acre plot south of Crisafulli Road and between Joseph Court and Judson, and the south border is going to be New Hope Road. This was not told to us. We couldn't even find it out on the map because it wasn't even pointed out. And it's going to be to a depth of 10 to 15 feet, and then they're going to leave it there. Leave it there. Merritt Island, that area is in a hazardous flood zone, and you're going to leave that muck there. From Sykes Creek, they're going to pump it. They're going to have a booster pump every 5,000 feet. It's going to take 2.5 years. It's going to go under the 528 causeway, under the barge canal, and then up. They have no permitting because they're going to put it in a wetland area, which is next to Judson Road. And I heard all this discussion about the oyster bed. And when I talked to somebody in here about this project and how detrimental it was going to be, I was told, well, wait a minute, you know, we just put the bid out and what happens is not our concern. That's what I get. That's what I've been told. And to say I'm disappointed is beyond that. I feel disrespected by this group. And I feel like you've stabbed our community in the back. Merritt Island, it borders more water than, North Merritt Island borders more water than any other community. Who has more water than North Merritt Island that we border? And you're trying to affect us and talk to us about we're saving the lagoon, but you're willing to put this muck out there. Now, there are some changes, but as of today, that's still the project. And no one in our community was told about it. Not a single person. I feel like this is a sleight of hand, that this is what you're doing to our community. The Oversight Committee has not done your job. You know, if you can't look at the actual project and see what's going on, and the only reason you approved this is you wanted more bang for your buck because it's 15% less. It was the cheapest. That's the only reason I see that it was proposed and it was taken. North Merritt Island, what do? We do our part. We certainly do. North Merritt Island has the oldest homeowners association in the county, 30 years. We put out a monthly newsletter and we have a monthly meeting every month. 30 years we've been doing this. We've built 2 parks that enhance the community and show the highlights of our ecosystem. We actively support the Sam's House. We prevented the freight train from coming across North Merritt Island, which would put in a causeway, and we helped Tony Sasso get elected. Who did what? What did Tony Sasso do? Who in here? Come on, tell me. Tony Sasso got the Clean Ocean Act passed. It wasn't passed until Tony Sasso came along, and he only had a half a term and he got it passed. And we actively supported his commitment toward that goal.
Sir.
Pardon?
Time's up.
Okay, I request that you change your disconnect in here, because right now our community is looking at this committee here as a stab in the back.
Another expiration of our time.
Yeah, Bob.
I think that
We got 5 minutes left.
we take all citizen comments, right?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as-
Yeah, I'm Bob Chu. I'm chairman of the Volusia Indian River Lagoon Coalition. And right now the lagoon up our end is pretty good, but we're very concerned what's coming through the Haulover Canal. And we just wanted to second Jim's suggestion of putting all your energies towards stopping human waste and a moratorium on new septic systems. So thank you.
Thank you. My name's Captain Bill Shear. I'm not a resident in Florida. I live in northern Wisconsin, but I've owned property here in Brevard County for 25 years. Your new tourism director, sir. For the last 20 years or so, I've brought $200,000 worth of business to Brevard County. This year, it's $2,000. It's not unknown that this fishery is gone. I'm 1,500 miles away, and people know it. I'm only one individual. If there's 10 people like me, that's 2 million. If there's 100 people like me, that's $200 million this county is losing from tourism alone. Think about that. Make this work. It's not going to help me. I'm too old now. But people down the line, all of your property values here, mine included, it's going to make a difference. Do it now, because you don't have another chance. Thank you.
Seeing no.
My name is John Hitchcock. I'm founder and president of Florida Wetlands Forever. And we were started by a group of duck hunters that used to duck hunt out on the lagoon. The lagoon used to be a place where ducks would come by the hundreds of thousands, especially lesser scaup. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says that the Indian River Lagoon is one of the most important stopover points during the winter migration for lesser scaup. Good luck finding any on it now. We used to hunt puddle ducks all up and down the lagoon. I built a boat that cost me, a blind boat, that cost me about $35,000 just to hunt out in the lagoon with my dogs. I'm sure there's probably some people that are glad we're not hunting out there anymore, but the food web's gone for them. That's why they're gone. The mollusks didn't die because of shell fishing. They died because of things like brown tide and macroalgae. So I think you guys have your work cut out for you, and I think you know what it is. It's not playing around with oysters or, you know, muck will come later, oysters will come later. You need to fix the wastewater infrastructure all up and down the lagoon, and especially in Brevard County. It is criminal what's happened. You know, we're 28 years behind Tampa Bay, and there's no excuse for that. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further discussion from the public comment, we're really at our limit. So if, yes, go ahead.
I wanted to thank all the citizens for coming. We've got a big turnout today. I love seeing anglers and outdoorsmen here. This committee is filled with them, so we are you. And I appreciate you guys coming today.
Courtney.
I also wanted to echo that, and I wanted to make sure that y'all know is we agree with you on everything you're saying, with the exception of not doing anything else but getting rid of the waste the treatment plant issues. We're concentrating on that. Obviously, we have a lot of projects going on, but we just heard a good presentation from Dr. De Freese about having a multifaceted approach, and so it is important, even though it is, we do spend the lion's share of our funds on septic removal, and all of the wastewater is being focused on right now, and also muck removal, but we still need to do all of the other things in the plan. So we agree with you, yes, we definitely need to get the septic tank issue under control. The one thing that we haven't discussed, which I would like to discuss, which I was brought up here, was limiting septic tanks in the future, and how do we make that recommendation to the county commission to look at that. So maybe we could put that on a future agenda, because that is something that we haven't been looking at, which I think we do look at.
And the planning and zoning rules need to be looked at, because I just had somebody forced to put a septic tank in. Granted, it's a new on-site system, but forced to put one in even though they're on a shoreline because of county rules on Merritt Island.
So let's bring that, let's look at that as a future agenda item. And we have city rules too. So, we should maybe get together and structure maybe a questionnaire of what those rules are countywide and what each city requires, stuff like that. That would probably be a good start. But I agree, we need to do something about it.
And I would just say also to all of you that came, unfortunately, we don't have that decision-making power on this committee. We can't issue a moratorium.
Right.
It goes to the county commission, and so they're the ones that you need to speak to about that. It's not that we can't make a recommendation, and I do believe that we should address this and look at it, but they're the ones that will ultimately make the decision.
Madam Chairman, I think this committee would be happy to take over wastewater management if the public would cause all the agencies that are currently funded to do that, with sewer fees and so on, to give us their money. But the opportunity cost of us taking over their job is that all this other stuff that has to happen in parallel ain't going to happen. So go talk to the county commission, go talk to the people that you send your sewer fees to. It ain't us.
That's a good point, because sewer utilities are paid by fees. So I don't know if we want to get in the business of using the sales tax for utility issues when it's the utilities that should be raising their rates if they need to.
They'll lower their fees if we take it over. That's the reason at the beginning of the meeting I said we need a spreadsheet that says who pays for all this stuff, and you're going to find we're a very, very small dollar component of it.
All right, we have gone beyond our limit. So this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you next month.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.